All right, well, maybe we will go ahead and get started with the early items, and then hopefully Commissioner Scharf and Commissioner Danaher will join us soon and we can make note of it. So why don't we go ahead and start? Welcome everybody to the UAC meeting this afternoon. We'll start with a roll call, and I'll just read out names and you can let us know you're here. Vice Chair Siegel.
Present.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Johnston.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Scharf. Commissioner Scharf, I think you're on mute if you...
Here.
Thank you. And I don't see Commissioner Danaher right now, and I'm here. Lisa Forcell, Chair as well. Agenda review and revisions. We've got a packed agenda tonight. I don't think we have any revisions to what went out, but we have 4 meaty items of new business that we will get to soon. But let's start with if there are any members of the public that have indicated they want to speak. Do we have any communications from the public? Oh, and hold on, let's go ahead. Commissioner Danaher.
Present.
Awesome, thanks.
Chair Forcell, we do have one speaker in the public, Gary
Excellent.
Lindgren.
All right, go ahead and let's assume 3 minutes for this comment.
Hello, this is Gary Lindgren. Last week, I reviewed the video from the October's UAC meeting on the topic of carbon offsets. And while watching, I had 2 questions in mind. What is a typical project for carbon offsets? And then why are we doing this? No one asked the second question. Do we do this for bragging rights with other cities? I can't imagine myself talking to friends or relatives and saying, look, Palo Alto has carbon neutral natural gas. It makes no sense. I suggest that instead of sending money outside the city and the state, that we use the money here and phase out City Hall's gas-fired equipment and convert them to heat pump versions. This would also include other cities' buildings around town. Also suggest starting incentive programs for residents to replace gas-fired clothes dryers with heat pump versions and replace gas cooktops and stoves with induction versions. Then we can keep track of dryers, stoves, and water heaters that have been upgraded. Now we can brag. There should also be a program to convert wood-burning fireplaces to gas fireplace inserts or freestanding gas stoves. And these would be the kind of gas stoves that would be for heating. And then we would reduce smoke in the winter months. And then there's one more thing. Palo Alto likes to promote that its electricity is carbon neutral. This is not so. You know, California uses natural gas to generate 1/2 of its electricity. And since Palo Alto is connected to the grid, that means that Palo Alto gets 1/2 of its electricity from natural gas. Now, Palo Alto utilities have done a great job in securing renewable sources of electricity, but that is how we buy energy and pay for it. When we use electricity, that is different because we don't have a direct connection to these renewable sources. We must connect through the grid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lindgren. We on the commission can't respond at this time, but we appreciate your comments. Are there any other members of the public that have indicated that they want to speak?
I do not see any more.
All right, then we will move ahead. The minutes. Tabitha Boatwright sent out a revision to the minutes indicating, I think it was that Commissioner Smith had made a request instead of Commissioner Jackson. Did everybody see that? Are there any additional revisions to the minutes? All right, I don't see any hands raised. Would anybody like to move approval of
the motion to approve?
Second.
All right, I'll do a quick roll call to approve the minutes. Vice Chair Siegel.
Approve.
Commissioner Jackson,
Approve.
Commissioner Johnston,
Approved.
Commissioner Smith,
Approve.
Commissioner Scharf,
Approve.
Commissioner Danaher.
Approve.
All right, and I approve as well. Thank you very much. Let's see, I don't think we have any unfinished business from last time, so why don't we move ahead to the Utilities Director report. Director Batchelor?
Thank you, Chair Frizzell. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Councilmember Cormack. Just some quick updates. One of the items that was asked by the Commission to talk a little bit about was around some updates around COVID-19. So as everybody's aware that late last August, Governor Newsom released a blueprint for a safety economy, which created a tiered system in the COVID-19 restrictions that all counties in California must follow. And so Santa Clara County is currently in its orange risk tier, which is number 3, and will stay there until the state moves the county forward into a lesser, more restrictive, depending on the number of COVID cases. So what comes out of those items were certain indoor businesses and activities may resume with a limited capacity of 25%, including gyms, fitness centers, pools, movie theaters, worship services, and restaurants and family entertainment centers that allow natural distancing activities such as bowling alleys and climbing walls. Retail businesses and libraries no longer have the capacity limitations. Indoor shopping malls are no longer having a capacity limitation, but more common areas remain closed. Museums, zoos may also increase their capacities and their limits. All the businesses must ensure everyone's visiting their facilities is able to maintain at least that 6-foot distancing that we're all aware of. A number of programs and services which previously involved the person's consultings and the home visits have been converted to virtual formats. So this has to deal with our Home Genie as one example of the format changes, and now we offer virtual rather than in-home consulting, including home electrification, readiness, key account, business rep have been sharing recovery resources with the community to assist in the smooth transition. So a little bit about just from a utilities perspective is right now that we are about 100 folks, staff members are working from home, which is across the board from engineering, our resource management group, and our customer service group. And some of our admin folks are working from home. And then about 115 staff members are actually working on site every day. So that's the operational groups. And about half of the engineering group is coming in on a daily basis. So again, stressing to them, the city recently went ahead and purchased masks for all employees throughout the city that actually have the Palo Alto emblem on the side of the face mask. Some swagger that we can give out to hopefully will make sure that our folks are actually wearing their masks. We have plenty of masks that face coverings that N95s that are needed for our operational crews. The one exception to that portion of it is that we've decided from a utilities perspective that the staff that are up in the air working on poles or in the underground vaults, they need to be able to talk to each other from the ground level to the top of the pole or from the ground into the vault. So when there is ongoing work, those individuals are not wearing their masks. It's a safety factor that I feel is important, that they need to be able to communicate with each other. But as the folks that are on the ground, they need to be wearing their masks. And when those folks come up out of the vaults or coming down off the pole, they need to be putting their masks back on. So we're doing our best we can to make sure that the utilities is abiding by that. Our safety officer understands and has been doing checks on routine checks out in the field, as well as when we have folks at the MSC. We also have some of our folks, staff members at the MSC, where they're individual contributors, where they can start their day in their vehicles. They're not working with a crew. They're actually starting off in their trucks. So they're not coming into the buildings. They have capabilities of working their tags directly from their vehicle, and then they leave, and then they come back at the end of the day. So we are trying to eliminate as much bodies into the MSC on the utility side as much as possible. Again, engineering has done the same. We've limited this number of staff. We've put signs on doors on entrances. This way is an exit, this way is an entrance. We're trying to keep people more than that 6 feet apart in the common areas. So we're working really hard to make sure that we have no cases at this period of time. We've had, since the time frame in March a year ago when this has all started, we've had 3 cases in the operational side where someone actually came into the site, didn't know that they had COVID. We had one incident where it was with infected 3 other folks. So they had to isolate at that period of time. No one has been serious. Everybody's been back to work. And so we haven't had any issues with long-term illnesses from a utilities perspective. The next item is it's a new campaign called Switch is On campaign. We've been collaborating with Building Decarbonization Coalition and other utilities on outreach campaigns to promote home electrification. The campaign is the Switch is On. We're running digital blitz on this campaign in November and early December, and we'll include running digital ads on popular online platforms, as well as leaving the city's social media channels and e-newsletters. The digital ads will direct traffic to the website, switcheson.org, which provides information on how to make the switch from natural gas to electric appliances. Our Clean Fuel Rewards program is continuing. Electric vehicle rebates will be coming soon to all CPAU customers, where they'll be participating in the Clean Fuel program, which is statewide point of EV sales. The program launches by the end of the year. And we expect a rebate of about $1,000 for the purchase of EVs at participating dealerships. And we're contributing up to $1 million in our low carbon fuel standard funds towards that program. Sunshare Solar's workshop. We had a workshop on October the 27th, where we hosted a workshop to inform residents about Bay Area Sunshare Solar Group Buy program. The event was pretty well attended. We had 44 participants, as well as we had representatives from 3 of the solar installation companies there to answer any kind of Q&A questions that might have come up during the presentation portions. And the last one is the clean and effective heating and cooling with home efficiency. So one of the things that Genie is our program is actually moving expanding their services, is that we'll be hosting a 3rd education webinar with Home Efficiency Genie on November the 10th at 6:30. And this session is to learn about advancements in heating and cooling technologies with emphasis on efficiency on all heat pumps, systems, and finding details in the links. So register is at cityofpaloalto.org / on the workshops. And with that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Director Batchelor. We will go ahead and turn then to new business. The first item is the presentation of state legislation and a recommendation to affirm the guidelines. And why don't we first check and see if there's a member of the public that wants to comment on this item?
Call-in listeners, please press *9 if you'd like to speak on an agenda item. I don't see anyone raising their hands. Chair.
All right. Thank you. Why don't we go ahead then and I don't know if there's whoever on staff wants to take over.
Yeah, so Heather Dahl's with us today, this afternoon. She works for the utilities as well as for the city and tracks most of our state legislator and our recommendations that deal with the guidelines. And so she's going to be going over a presentation from 20 and 21 state legislators. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
Great, thank you. I just want to be sure everyone can hear me and see my screen. Great, thank you so much, Commissioner. So as Dean mentioned, we do have a bit of a presentation about state legislation, and also going to be talking a bit about the utilities guidelines as well going into 2021. So with regard to legislation, my presentation is going to be pretty brief, and that is mostly because the state legislative session was pretty brief. The legislature extended their spring recess in March, and then they extended their summer recess in July, and the Senate actually postponed its session in August, all as a result of COVID-19. And with this shortened session, legislative leadership mandated that all of the members drop a significant number of their bills because they just didn't have the correct amount of time to pass close to 2,500 bills that they usually pass over the year. In addition, a lot of the bills that did move forward were related to COVID-19. They were also related to what I would call the hot topics of the year, such as employer and independent contractor status and affordable housing. And then near the end of the year, the collective attention was turned to police reform. So there were quite a few bills about police reform. I say that to indicate that so much was happening in the shortened legislative session that a lot of the utilities bills were just crowded out. And as a result, we didn't see a whole lot of activity in the utility space that we usually do. However, there were a few key bills that I wanted to just speak a little bit about today. The first on the energy side was another attempt at long duration storage. Specifically, there was an attempt to require IOU procurement of long duration storage, more specifically of NextEra's Eagle Crest pump storage project. This is the 5th failed attempt at this bill since 2018. 3 times it failed in this year alone. NextEra has their pumped hydro project and they would like people to purchase from it. So they continue to come to the legislature. We continue to track the bill because any mandate on PG&E and the other IOUs may very well affect us. So luckily this bill again died twice in 2 iterations in the Assembly this year and then once in the Senate this year. There were a couple of bills that did pass that we were tracking. One regard to construction is a mandate that would start in 2023, and this would require subsurface installations to be mapped with GIS coordinates, and also requires anyone who is working on subsurface installations who notices any damage to notify the appropriate authorities within 48 hours. So it takes place in about 3 years, and we're gonna start operationalizing that. And then lastly on this slide, there was a bill, a COVID-19 related bill that was passed that would require the state to establish a PPE, personal protective equipment inventory for healthcare workers, as well as for essential workers, which includes government staff whose work with the public continues during a crisis or a pandemic. And so certainly that would include our utilities operations staff. So that was a good bill that passed this year. That's all I was going to mention on this particular session that ended in September, unless anyone has any questions. Okay, so we can talk a little bit about what might happen next year in 2021. On the energy side, maybe NextEra will bring another bill to force procurement of its project. We don't know, but I think now we're just in the mindset to always kind of look out for it because this happens so often. So we'll continue to watch for it. Interestingly, because of the August rolling blackouts, a couple of issues that were either we thought were gone or were just seeping under the consciousness have been raised again. And the first was with regard to resource adequacy. During the August blackouts, Steve Burbridge, who's the most recent former CEO of CAISO, stated that the RA program is broken. And the new current CEO has stated that that resource adequacy program is something that needs to be looked at. So there may be a bill about RA. We don't have any idea what that bill might say, what it might look like. There's nothing in draft form, but because it's something that's kind of rising to the level of talk at CAISO, it might be something that comes up. Also, regionalization might be back. If you recall, regionalization is a very broad term to, in a nutshell, describe the combining of California's electric grid with the electric grid in other Western states to combine a big Western grid. This is an issue that did have legislation attached to it a few years ago, and it never passed. However, in August, the governor was asked at a press conference specifically about regionalization. He was non-committal. And then in September, there was an article in the San Diego Union Tribune where the author wondered if regionalization would not have alleviated or prevented any of the rolling August blackouts. So this conversation may once again become a piece of legislation. And if you recall, there were a lot of issues surrounding regionalization, such as governance, resource adequacy, transmission cost allocation, and so on. It was a big bill, and every time it's been a bill, and so it may again come up simply because of the blackouts. On the water side, there is some regulatory issues that may become legislation with regard to affordability that haven't been. In 2016, the Water Board developed some recommendations. Oftentimes, agency recommendations will come into a bill so that they can be implemented. That hasn't happened yet, so it might happen in 2021. And then because there's been a lot of financial impacts on ratepayers on the water side, and I'm sure on the energy side, the Water Board specifically has been very interested in understanding those financial impacts. And they have been contacting water systems to try to get an understanding of whether or not customers are paying or not paying. So we may see a bill in 2021 regarding affordability, perhaps a study bill. And then there's always this issue of wildfires, and we usually see that in the energy side, but there might be a bill, perhaps even another study bill as well, about whether water systems are prepared in case of a wildfire in their area. And again, we haven't heard anything specifically, but these are just some things that people are talking about that we might want to be aware of. And then lastly, since so many legislators did not get the bills passed this year that they intended to, they may take those bills and just continue them or reintroduce them into 2021. We also think police reform will continue to be an issue in 2021. Affordable housing is always an issue. So it's going to be a big year. Whether or not that means that it will crowd out the utilities related legislation again, we just aren't sure. So we're just waiting to see what happens. Also in 2021, unfortunately, one of our favorite legislators is terming out. Mr. Hill has been such a friend to Palo Alto Utilities, always generous with his time in meeting with us and speaking so well of us. He will be leaving us, and Mr. Becker will become Senator Becker in January. He is a businessman from Menlo Park. I don't believe he's been a politician or held elective office before, but he will be coming into the Capitol building in January. Once he gets settled, we'll reach out to him and we will start introducing him to CPAU and telling him about our programs and our projects. And CMUA and NCPA's lobbyists will be doing the same. So we will get him well acquainted with all of our offerings and the unique nature of Palo Alto. That was all I had on the legislative side, if anyone had any questions.
Are there any commissioners with questions or comments?
Thank you for the very short, incisive presentation. Mr. Becker is a fan of clean energy, so I'm sure he's going to like what he hears from you.
Great. Good to know. Thank you.
I recall that recently the governor made some pronouncements about electrical vehicle usage or mandates in the future. Is that going to become legislation at any point, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So he did put out an executive order with regard to new sales of new cars in about 15 years in California. Typically, items that are in an executive order don't become legislation because they don't need to. However, the specifics of that, we might see some legislative or regulatory action. He hasn't talked about that. Nothing has happened on that front yet. So we're just kind of waiting to see not just what's going to happen, but I don't want to say, but if a lot of it is going to happen, if it's actually a firm commitment or if it's more aspirational goals. Okay. And then lastly, with regard to the guidelines, as you know, we have a one-page document in your packet of legislative guidelines. These provide direction to staff, and so we don't have to come back to you and to the City Council every time we want to move on a piece of legislation or regulations. These guidelines have worked very well, and we're not suggesting any changes. Rather, we're just suggesting that you recommend to the City Council that Council adopt the current 2020 guidelines into 2021. And here, if you would like to make that motion, is the motion for you.
Is there any questions or comments about the legislative policy guidelines? Looking for hands up. Councilmember McCormack, I see you, but I think you like to go last. So are there any
Aye.
commissioners? Commissioner Danaher.
Yes, I reviewed those. I'm supportive, so I would move in favor of recommending those guidelines.
Let's just make sure we finish out our conversation before we go to a motion.
Oh, I thought you
go
were
ahead.
asking for the motion. So,
No, I was asking for questions and comments first. Go ahead,
Okay.
Commissioner Smith.
Hi, my question is more about COVID. From my employer's perspective, and certainly from my client's perspective, COVID will last at least until possibly this time next year. If legislature continues based upon history, how realistic is it to expect anything out of the California legislature next year?
I'm sorry, do you mean how realistic is it that they will continue to work?
Cut short sessions, likely. Inability to enact legislation, likely.
Well, what we saw this year was that they were still able to do that. They still passed hundreds of bills. It just wasn't at the thousands of bills that they did. They still acted. They met over Zoom as we are, and they met in the Capitol building. And they did allow staff to come to the Capitol building. It was just limited. So I think that would likely continue. They'll continue to meet virtually, and they'll continue to go to Sacramento in limited time, and they will still continue to pass bills. However, certainly it might be a limited number of bills as it was this year.
Did they provide us any indication as to how they prioritize their bills? Or is there a prioritization of bills that I'm unfamiliar with?
Not generally. The priority tends to be House specific. The leader of the Assembly, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the President of the Senate tend to have their priorities. Each chairperson of a committee tends to have his or her priorities, and then each member has his or her own individual priorities.
Noted. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Are there any other commissioners? So I'll go ahead. The guidelines are familiar, and the idea of having guidelines, I think, has been in place for as long as I've been on the commission. I'm not aware of a time, and I could just be misremembering, that staff has come to the UAC sort of not using the guidelines, but has come for a discussion or recommendation on a legislative item. And I'm just curious, how often does it come up, and that you go to council, or that you go to the UAC and then council for guidance before, writing a letter or lobbying or doing something on one of these items?
Well, we try to limit that, and that's the big reason why we have the guidelines is because we get your proactive approval so that we don't have to continue coming back to the UAC and council. I would also state that the utilities department is the only department that has its own set of guidelines, but there are, and Councilwoman McCormick can attest to this, I think, there are a set of guidelines for the city in general. And this same process that I'm doing with you all today, I will also do with City Council for the city guidelines. And so the council will pre-approve those guidelines as well so that we don't have to return. Having said that, there has been a couple of instances where I've gone back not to the UAC, but to council. And that is because in the city's advocacy process manual, whenever there is a bill that doesn't quite fit into the guidelines or it is very controversial, we will go back to council. But staff has to put in reports like the one before you approximately 5 weeks in advance of getting that meeting date. And with the legislature moving pretty quickly, it's very, very difficult to meet that timeline. So the short answer to your question, Commissioner, is it's never happened in the UAC in the 5 years that I've been here, and it once in a while happens at council.
Got it. So what I'm a little bit hearing you say is that it's largely about the timeline, but it's also a little bit about just not wanting to sort of bog down council to get approval on everything and just be able to move ahead.
Yes, it is both those things. And I'll throw in a third one, which is that sometimes legislation can be amended very quickly, particularly at the end of session. So if we start a staff report in week 1, by the time it gets to council and or the UAC, even in week 5, it could be a non-issue, or that bill could have changed, which renders everything moot.
Right. All right, Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Forcell. Hello, Ms. Dollar. It's always nice to see you.
Hi.
Much as local control is something that we benefit from and desire, I was interested as I looked at number 4 and reflected on the conversations and the comments we've gotten from so many people about how hard it is to install solar in Palo Alto, or why don't we have standards for, building, electric ADUs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not suggesting anyone make any changes at this point in time. I'm just thinking about the number of times it is suggested to us that the end result will be achieved more quickly if there's some standardization with neighbors in some sort of sub-regional way or the state. So I'm sure, you have already thought about this, but I just thought I'd mention that as we reflect on how we might change these going forward, because there really is something in between what we do in Palo Alto and what the state does. And that's, how we work with our neighbors in terms of actually getting some of this stuff to physically happen.
Thank you.
Commissioner Scharf, I just saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I was going to riff off what Councilmember Cormack said, and I think she makes a really good point. I do think that that's an issue for the council, but I agree with her, and I think there's so often it's actually harder in Palo Alto to achieve the goals that we say we want to achieve because our standards and building process and building plan process makes it much more difficult. And I think we hear this continually, and I've experienced it personally, and that so it is an interesting question. I mean, I do think that there's two choices. One, you could not oppose certain mandates that systemize it across the state. I tend to be a big fan of local control, but with that comes the responsibility of Palo Alto to take a serious look at how we get things approved and how we make it easier for people to make these changes of electrification and installing chargers and installing solar panels and all of that. And I think that's probably beyond the UAC, but I wanted to say that I fully support that, at least getting our house in order on that. And I don't think we have it in order. And it tends to be that if we don't get our house in order, then people tend to push for losing local control. And we see that on a number of fronts. So I just wanted to say I agree with Councilmember Cormack. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, now I think Commissioner Danaher, we could take that motion.
Okay, thank you. By the way, I agree with what was just said, and I'll have comments on that when we get to the EV part of the meeting. I move we recommend approval of those guidelines as presented.
I'll
do I have a-
second.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Commissioner Jackson. All right, I'll do a quick roll call. Vice Chair Siegel,
Approve.
Commissioner Jackson,
Approve.
Commissioner Johnston,
Approve.
Commissioner Smith,
Approved?
Commissioner Danaher,
Approve?
Commissioner Scharf,
Yes.
and I approve as well.
Thank you.
So, and then we don't have to vote on accepting the presentation, right? We just had the presentation in the agenda. It was listed as a recommendation.
That's right. It's just the motion. That was the only action item for you.
You got what you need.
I did. I
Great.
did. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then let's move on. We'll be talking about the 2025 base resource power supply contract. And before we go to the staff presentation, why don't we quickly check if there are any members of the public that want to speak on this item?
I do not see any speakers raising their hands or pressing *9.
All right, very good. Then let's move ahead to the staff presentation or introduction of the presentation. I never know where you guys want to start.
So I'd just like to introduce Senior Resource Planner Lena Perkins, who will talk to you about this this hydropower contract that makes up a very large portion of our portfolio.
Excellent, thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. This is the same presentation that you have in front of you. And I apologize. There you go. All right. All right, can you see the screen and hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Good evening, commissioners. This evening, I'm here to speak with you about renewing the contract for our 2025 to 2054 Western Electric Supply contract. So this is a 30-year contract. And it is, as Jonathan mentioned, been a pivotal part of our electric supply portfolio and is in fact the largest part of our supply portfolio. So this is a quick outline. I have a brief presentation for you today, and feel free to ask me to jump ahead if or spend more time on any section. But I'm just leading with the punchline first, which is our recommendation is to execute the full share of the 2025 Western contract available. Can provide some more background on what the contract is itself and what the product is, and then the next steps and timeline, and I'll end with the recommended motion. So for recommending this contract going forward, I'm going to call it Western from now on, but it's a large federal hydroelectric contract, and it is currently 40% of the city's electric supply. And the city actually was wholly supplied by Western up until about 1984. So, and it has been a very important part of our portfolio. It has the potential to be a competitively priced carbon-free electric resource. The city has the option to reduce or terminate this contract up until June 30th of 2024. So although we have to sign and return the contract by March of 2021, this is essentially a free option. And so that means that staff will be evaluating alternatives in earnest through 2023. And then the contract runs from 2025 to 2054. another key provision that we have not had until this new contract is that every 5 years, the city has the option to reduce or terminate. So given that it's a long contract without price guarantees, this is a really important aspect. And in closing, I think for some of you that are aware of the complexities around electricity in California and water in California, this project is mostly from the series of large dams that were built with as part of the federal Central Valley project. And so we are dealing with federal Bureau of Reclamation as well as Western area to manage and maintain value in this contract, as well as with the state coordinating how we operate the projects through the Delta especially. And these risks will be priced into our analysis and final 2024 decision. So that's the recommendation and those are the reasons. For more background, I'll go through more of the resource and then the contract aspects just to hit those main points again. It's roughly 40% of the electric supply. It's a federal hydropower and transmission from the Central Valley project. Again, a series of large dams, canals, and pumps that move water from the north of California to the south and generate electricity along the way. Has somewhat predictable costs, but a highly variable output, which carries risks in itself. And then going forward, there are significant risks and uncertainty in future costs, as well as future generation. And some of those risks and uncertainty hinge around climate change, environmental costs, as well as environmental regulations. As far as the contract itself, these are the same points, but just to hit them one last time, the city has a free option to reduce or terminate our share until June 30th of 2024. So we have more than 4 years. From 2025 to 2054, we can also reduce our share or terminate every 5 years. And there's a new overall rate formula set every 5 years. So we will know at least the structure of how we will be assigned costs before making that determination. So next steps and timeline. This contract must be executed by March of the upcoming year, March of 2021. Given the magnitude and uncertainties, the city will solicit and evaluate alternatives by 2023, meaningful alternatives that could replace part or all of the contract. And staff will make a final recommendation to maintain, reduce, or terminate our share of the 2025 Western-based resource electric contract by this June 2024 deadline. And again, along with our opportunities for off-ramps for free termination, we'll have to be continuously examining if this contract is still the right fit for the supply portfolio and for Palo Alto's needs. So this is the recommended motion, and I'm happy to take questions at this time.
One thing that I'd just like to add here is just to note that this contract requires a pretty significant level of coordination among the various customers, the other publicly owned utilities in California when it comes to negotiating with the federal government. And Northern California Power Agency coordinates a lot of those negotiations on behalf of the publicly owned utilities. In a normal year, coordinating with the federal government on this project does require some level of staff time. In the last couple of years, there have been some real opportunities to negotiate with the Bureau and with the Western Area Power Administration to improve the contract and to push back against potential cost increases that could be pushed on the power customers. And Palo Alto's been heavily involved in those negotiations and will continue to be over the next year, in addition to considering all of our different options. And we have made significant progress in creating a product that we may be interested in signing up for. There are still major risks and uncertainties, but we have, and Lena in particular has been heavily involved and committed to those negotiations.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just want to say thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for covering that.
Yes, and appreciate the presentation. I already see a lot of hands up, so why don't we go to questions and comments and discussion. Commissioner Scharf.
Thanks. I actually just wanted to say that as well, that, I know that staff, especially Lena and Jonathan as well, and the rest of the team has really worked hard on this. And we've actually made huge progress from where we were when I first got involved in NCPA in 2013 in getting a better contract and in dealing with some of the risks in mitigating that. I also think the attitude has changed a little bit, and I think that we're going to see that we will be more shoulder to shoulder with the water customers, which is where we want to be. At least that's my hope. But I think a lot of that stuff's still a little bit in flux, and we'll figure that out over the next 2 years or so. But I think we're bringing this right on track to a conclusion where it'll be an easy decision of what we do. And at least I hope so. So I think this is something we need to do. It maintains our options. It's a great base resource, and we should definitely move forward on this at this point.
Can I just quickly ask, does Palo Alto negotiate with the Bureau directly as a city or through the NCPA?
Through NCPA. There's a number of members that have this, and we negotiate as a group.
Got it.
Well, and NCPA usually likes to have member utilities there as well, so they can speak from the customer perspective. So, myself, Reading, Roseville, folks from those utilities, we're in direct negotiations with the Bureau as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I probably didn't state that correctly. What really happens is people like Lena drive the negotiations and are at the table with the Bureau as part of the NCPA group that does it. So when I say it's NCPA, she's not there negotiating with half the city. She's actually one of the lead people negotiating for all of the NCPA members. So I wanted to say that Palo Alto is extremely involved in this process, and our staff does a great job.
All right, well, is that it for you, Commissioner Scharf?
It is it for me.
On comments? Yep. Commissioner Johnston.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and I thought it was an excellent report. I really appreciate it. I had two questions. The first, you say that it has the potential to be a competitive electric resource, and I understand that the price fluctuates depending on whether it's a drought year or high water year. But historically, have we found the price of electricity from this project to be generally in line with our other sources of electricity?
Yes, we have. And, historically it's been, it's a cost-based resource that's only available to public utilities. And so that has the potential to be less expensive than market power. The droughts and other environmental restrictions, the latest 2015 drought put the resource far above market rate. And there have been some restructuring in how those costs are collected in terms of environmental costs being collected. That has changed from the Bureau's perspective. And so that in a comparable drought to 2015, it appears that the power customers would not be subject to the extreme volatility that they were 5 years ago.
So this is obviously one of the things you're looking closely at in terms of the, whether to go for the whole term of the contract. My other question, frankly, is just what is there any downside to our signing this now? You described as a free option, and that's certainly what it looks like in the presentation, and gives us a lot of flexibility. Are there any downsides? Any reason why we wouldn't want to do this?
I think from staff's perspective, no, there's no downside to signing this. If we want the option to have any of this contract, it's currently 40%, then we need to sign and execute this contract extension. And it's a new provision to be able to terminate up until 2024. That's a new addition from Western to try to recognize the, how risk averse public entities are. We don't know what the markets will look like. We don't know what the regulations will look like. But yes, there is no downside. And in fact, if we want this resource at all, we need your recommendation to have council recommend that the city manager execute the contract.
So to me, this is an easy decision. I mean, it does sound like a free option. It gives us flexibility. I don't see any reason not to do it.
Thanks, Commissioner Johnston. Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Lena, thank you. I too appreciated this detail. And you highlighted one of the risks, that is the drought of 2015, where rates went significantly above market. Can you just highlight very quickly, bullet point, if you will, some of the other risks that staff foresee?
Yes. So probably the two biggest risks are on the cost side. There are new costs coming to implement the federal biological opinions, which are related to the Endangered Species Act for the Delta and for the whole projects, the whole Central Valley project. And the allocation, and it's about $1 billion in the next 10 years. And the allocation of those costs is still being determined. And in terms of basically a formula for allocating those costs to different customers and taxpayers. And so there's one unknown, and the other major unknown is with respect to generation, the amount and timing of the generation that we receive from this, and the largest unknown is on the unimpaired flows that are working their ways through the courts right now, because those unimpaired flows in more closely resembling natural flows with less water held back by the dams would mean that, you have say a dam with 4 million acre feet of capacity, but that you don't kind of ever let it fill up, that you kind of run it as if it has 2 million acre feet of capacity. And so that has a lot of implications on the value of hydroelectricity, because you would be potentially spilling it or sort of dumping all this power when it rains. And then, in times of drought, you wouldn't have the water held back for water and power, and you're still paying for that 4 million acre feet reservoir. So, it has, I'm not making any commentary on the unimpaired flow itself, but it has major implications for the amount of generation and the value of that generation from these projects.
Great. On page 3, in your discussion, Your recommendation included staff going through and analyzing in detail the viable alternatives. Can you just highlight the top 2 viable alternatives?
There are a number. When we went through the integrated resource plan for the state in 2019, the 2 that came to the top in terms of matching the kind of plethora of needs from Palo Alto were actually New Mexico wind, because it's very well suited. It has it blows harder in the winter time, so it's higher generation in the winter time. It has a very, very high capacity factor, and it can be actually intertied into the California ISO grid. So it's in our market, it's being dispatched, to back down gas power plants, and there's transmission to get it here. And then also Northwest wind is very compelling, and the city does own part of transmission up to Washington, and that will come back to us in 2024. So we would have transmission to get Northwest wind here as well. So those, it's a little bit old, but those were 2 of the very interesting options. Of course, solar with storage locally prices are coming down all the time. So that is, the market is evolving. By 2025, we'll be living in a different world. So, but these contracts take lead time, and so your question is a good one.
Your footnote on the same page 3, I think I'm just a little bit confused, and just for my own clarification, the renewal, we're getting 98% of the total. We lose 2% in this renegotiation. Is it because the 2% are going to other clients, our peers in this negotiation? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes.
Okay.
They made an agreement in sort of the 2016 timeframe that existing customers would be eligible for up to 98% of their current share in order to create a pool for new customers, and existing customers could apply for that as well.
Okay. More closer to home, on the following page, on page 4, depending upon the year, the average cost of the base resource is expected to be $35 per megawatt hour to $70 per megawatt hour. And that's obviously dependent upon the amount of water, right? The drought. Can you just highlight for me, what's that contribution to my bill? If it's 35 megawatts per hour, what's my contribution? And if it's, how much of it's double, obviously, but what is the contribution?
Right. So I don't want to get my math wrong here, but in general, I think it's 1/3 of a cent is $35 per megawatt hour. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit tired. So we might want to run that. But basically, you just divide that, you multiply by 1,000 and divide by 100 to get cents.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Or rather the reverse. Yeah.
When you say the base resource contract extension elements, and in the contract term, item number 1, you highlight in the event that it ultimately becomes uneconomic. I assume those 2 risks that you just highlighted, I would consider those very significant, and God forbid that we go into a 10-year drought and then we've got a very significant problem. That is the point at which it becomes uneconomic. Is that what you think? Or because your second risk, if we're only holding half the capacity, there's no market for it anyways, especially in a drought year, right? They won't have anything to sell.
So your question is, how would we actually use the off-ramp?
Uneconomical. How would it become uneconomical?
Yeah, well, so year to year, we do not have control over, the generation, the rain, essentially, and the amount, the hydrologic year basically drives a lot of the volatility on the whole Western interconnect and the whole West Coast. And so there's, so we are very exposed to the most volatile part of electricity prices in the Western US, so we could have, the worst case scenario would be that we sign up, at the beginning of a 5-year ramp, and we go straight into a 5-year drought, and we're stuck with it until the next off ramp period. This is a dispatchable resource within limits for mandatory minimum flows and not running reservoirs dry. But so in general, we can shape this resource to capture the highest value hours of a day. We just can't shape it seasonally very well. And so, that does provide a bit of a hedge in the fact that in a low hydro year, regional, not just California, but regional electricity prices will be higher. And so when we do generate power, even though it's less power being generated, that power is more valuable. So, there are some, there's a lot in this, but that I think with the retirement of natural gas generation inside of California, and with the reform or potential action in then that's flexible dispatchable power is what you can use for RA, for resource adequacy, as Heather was speaking about. And this is a dispatchable resource in that regard. And so there is a tremendous amount of value from that, that flexible dispatchable capability. And especially the grid does not currently reach its peak strain in the middle of the winter when this resource is not generating, or it reaches its peak strain in the summer and fall due to air conditioning. So, and this resource is there for that, less in the fall, more in the summer. But I think that when you quote the dollars on dollars per megawatt hour, you're not fully reflecting how valuable a dispatchable resource such as this is.
Great. I guess my final question is in your evaluation, and first of all, I too agree that we should do this. But in your evaluation, you highlight that staff will consider cost certainty, term flexibility, portfolio diversification, portfolio fit, additionality of carbon-free energy, and environmental impacts of benefits. I would also add, if you will, a hedge we're taking advantage of right now in terms of bucket exchange. If City Council choose to continue that program, that is something that should figure into any modeling. Super. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Chair Danaher. I'm sorry, Commissioner Danaher.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You're gonna reappoint me. Lena, thanks for the presentations. If we're evaluating alternatives in 2023, is there time to put in place for 2024? Or are we really sort of locking ourselves in for a first 5-year renewal?
We could execute some shorter term contracts, with existing projects, or, so.
Or step it down, take a smaller allocation in 24 and step it down over time. Okay.
Right. Yeah, we could. There are a number. There are.
Well, I don't need detail, but that was all I needed.
We are not locking ourselves into the first 5 years.
Okay.
Commissioner, just the one other short thing that I'll say is that we're in 2020 right now. In terms of work planning, we're going to complete that evaluation before 2023, and we'll complete it on a timeline that gives us time to put out an RFP for additional resources.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And the evaluation, just to be clear, it will entail soliciting competitive bids. We're not gonna evaluate a pretend project that couldn't deliver.
Okay. Terrific. Thanks.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
yeah,
clarifying.
pleasure. Yeah.
Commissioner Danaher, did you have any other comments?
No, I did not. Thank you.
All right, Vice Chair Siegel.
Thanks. First, Lena, thank you. This has come a long way since the first time I remember you're presenting to the UAC on this, and the flexibility in the outs is a huge step forward from the prior contract. And I know that was a lot of work, so thank you. You sort of halfway, and I guess the short-term question is, yes, I'm all in favor of this short-term commitment to give us more time. You mentioned something about dispatchability, and I'm just wondering whether if that is at risk if views about the environment and the environmental impact of dams changes with a new administration or California, and how much that could affect this.
Yeah, I'll give a short answer because it's a complicated question, and it takes more time than we have here. But in general, the projects can be operated with inter-daily flexibility and ramping. So hour to hour, they're built for flexibility, and they have reservoirs above and below to sort of mitigate the impact on the fish. And the fish are not going past the large dams. They're stocked, even with ladders. And so I'll just say that in general, the ability to dispatch within a day is probably fairly protected from environmental, from environmental concerns, because it doesn't represent as much of an environmental risk as you might think. It's more the mandatory minimum flows that, and the temperatures in the water, and then the delta pumping restrictions that are right now that the fish biologists think are more pivotal for the ecosystems.
Great.
And Lena, just confirming, those factors you just named affect the seasonal dispatchability as opposed to the intraday dispatchability of the resource, which can affect the value. Do I have that right?
Yes, and the fact that, you have to keep water in the rivers and you have to keep it a certain temperature where, whereas if you were just operating these for power or financial benefits with no regard to the river, you would hold that water back in times of low hours. If this was just a battery, you wouldn't be generating when there's no price signal.
And then the last question is, do we have to come to any agreement with the other, with our partners on this in terms of when it is dispatched? Presumably we have demands pretty in line, but I don't know what their portfolio looks like. And is it something we have to work out?
Yeah, so this is an interesting product. It actually, although it resides within California, it is not in the CalISO grid. And so it is actually scheduled 2 days in advance. And the schedulers for this federal entity, Western Area Power Administration, they let our schedulers in the ISO know, okay, here's your max and here's your min for every hour of the day, and you dispatch it within that band. And if they're in a flood stage, or if they have to get rid of power, the minimum amount of power that we take can be quite high. But so that's how it works on an operational basis. That's also one of the tricky things going forward that actually pertains to regionalization as well, is that this project is actually entering the energy imbalance market, which is the real-time voluntary regionalization light that is currently operating across the Western Interconnect. And so we hope that that kind of brings it into closer alignment with those customers that reside in the CAISO, such as ourselves.
Thanks.
All right, are there any other commissioners? I have a couple of questions. All right, well, I certainly echo the appreciation for the report, for the work that you've done negotiating. It sounds like we have a lot better terms than a couple of years ago when we were last talking about this. One thing that you mentioned in your presentation just now that caught my attention was that it hasn't been sorted out yet, but that there's likely to be sort of more favorable cost allocation in dry years, so that what happened during the last drought wouldn't hit the city as severely financially as before. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So the largest part of that in terms of both cost allocation and cost predictability going forward is that, as you know, NCPA, along with other power customers, filed suit against the against the U.S. federal government and the Bureau of Reclamation in how they were assigning costs for the some of the environmental costs for the CVPIA. And in the past, in a poor water year, power customers would pay a flat fee for that environmental cost of $6 to $12 per acre foot. And whatever the balance of about $35 million a year was, the water customers would the power customers would pick up whatever wasn't collected from water customers. So it kind of had a double volatility aspect on power customers.
You said the power customers would pick up the first part, or the water customers would pick up the first part?
So the water customers paid for what they received.
They paid a flat fee, and then
they paid the
power
adder.
picked up the tab.
They picked up the tab every year. And so not only do you have low generation in a dry year and you're paying a flat fee for the generation, we would actually pay an increased environmental fee, environmental costs. We would pick up the in those dry years. And so that led to just very extreme volatility. In some years, the environmental costs would be 5% of the cost of the projects, and in some years they would be 40% of the cost of the project, and in those years where the project was above market anyway. And so what the Court of Appeals ruled was that the statute required proportional collection of those environmental costs, and so of the total environmental costs, it needs to be a fixed percentage for water and power. And however they want, the Bureau is still working through how to administer it and has put forth some public proposals on that. And that looks promising for predictability and for just ensuring that power customers pay the proportional cost over time.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. But it sounds like it's in the hands of the courts, or no, it's in the hands, is it part of the negotiation, or is it?
So the court has ruled it is, and the damages are still under discussion. But the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has put forth public proposals for implementing what they're calling proportionality going forward. They're not intending to fight the ruling on proportionality.
So it's just how it gets implemented at this
they're
point.
They're revamping their process and their process of collecting these going forward.
Got it. Let's see. Well, most of my other questions have been asked by others and answered thoroughly. Thank you very much. Very interesting that some of the alternatives, for example, include wind in other states, and that solar plus storage might actually be competitive. I wanted to capture your quote, 2025 will be very different than now. And so my only other question is just out of curiosity, because the report very helpfully listed different kinds of risks. Is the infrastructure of the Central Valley project in good shape? And the question is coming from a place of like the SFPUC and the, what was it, $4 billion, project that was necessary to strengthen that project. Is there anything like that on the horizon for this Central Valley project?
Yeah, so the power side of it, and so the generation and the transmission is in good shape, and we Western takes great pride in running a really safe transmission system. The dams are sound. The canals and pumps and other water conveyance structures have a lot of required maintenance and a lot of threats in terms of subsidence in the Central Valley. But they have a lot of maintenance to be done there. So, I think that's something that
is that likely to be allocated at least in part to the power customers?
we'll have to see. But the purpose of the project is for flood protection and to convey water, and power is an offshoot because they have enough, elevation and water to make more power than they needed. And so we'll have to see how those proceedings go. And we want people to have safe water, and we want, it's feeding the agricultural heartland. So,
Sure.
but yeah, they have a lot of risks. This is mostly large agricultural users, and they are not able to use groundwater in the way that they were. And so, this will become even more critical to keeping that agricultural land productive.
Got it. Well, thank you. Let's see, Councilmember Cormack, you've been waiting very patiently with your hand up.
Just wanted to take a moment to thank Dr. Perkins. Every single time she gives a presentation, I learn something, and I'm even more grateful that we have such a professional staff managing some things that are so really incredibly complex. So just wanted to say thank you.
Appreciate it. I think that is generally widely echoed. All right, do you want to maybe put the motion back up on the screen so we can all refresh our...
Yes. All right. Here we go.
Thank you. All right, and do we have anyone who...
I'll make the motion.
All right.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. So it's moved as recommended by staff. Vice Chair Siegel,
Approve.
Commissioner Jackson,
Approve.
Commissioner Johnston,
Approve.
Commissioner Smith.
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Scharf,
Approve.
Commissioner Danaher,
Approve.
and I approve as well. So the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's see, quick time check. It's 5:20. We have two very meaty topics left, and we usually take a break after either the second or the third item. Can I have a quick show of hands who wants the break now as opposed to after the next item? Shoot.
I'm indifferent, whatever.
Yep. Commissioner Smith, how strongly do you feel?
Not strongly at all.
All right. Since yours was the only hand raised, and if you're not feeling too strong, why don't we plow ahead and then we'll appreciate the break more later. So moving on, discussion of electrification cost and staffing impacts on the City of Palo Alto's electric and gas distribution systems. A follow-up to an item we discussed previously where staff was proposing to do this study. Now they've done big parts of it, and so we're back to discuss what we've learned. Director Batchelor, Assistant Director Ebenstein, I don't know who's taking this one.
Thank you, Chair Forcell.
Oh, and sorry, I
Yes,
just
I-
forgot public
Yes,
comment.
there is one public comment, Mr. Brett
Yep,
Anderson.
sorry about that. Let's go ahead and take care of that first. Who is speaking?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. Great report. We saw it a few days ago. That is a few of us in Carbon Free Palo Alto and others. I think Jonathan and team did a really good job here. And I really think that this is kind of a breakthrough milestone. So we're talking here about the cost and feasibility of completely converting a gas infrastructure to all electric, which I think is I just haven't seen any analysis done at a community level of that yet in the US or anywhere really. So I think this is great to start off with. So I sent an email earlier in the day, and I don't know if any of you have had a chance to read it, but I just wanted to cover the 4 or 5 main points there right now. So the one thing that kind of jumped out is that this report is just focused on single family homes, and that's just one portion, sizable, but not even the majority of the gas use in Palo Alto. So commercial buildings and multifamily kind of aren't really mentioned, and there's not a real kind of analysis showing why the focus is purely on single family. So reporting on that would be a great way to just get the full picture in view. We also think that there's a lot of potential here for modern all-electric homes and devices that are on an interactive grid to really address the peaks of the duck curve, also some of the average needs for energy in homes across the community, and also to address the startup costs after an outage, which were also mentioned in the report as a challenge from a peak capacity standpoint. So when I talk about all electric homes and interactive devices, what I mean are batteries, heat pump systems that can be controlled, time shifting those loads around during the day, having bi-directional charging for automobiles, products of which are coming out next year, where you can switch your home to be powered from your vehicle, and vice versa. So I think all of those are really important technologies that within the next couple of years, with the rapid changes, are going to affect our long-term capacity needs for infrastructure. Other things are insulating homes that will address the peak demand and average demand for home energy needs, and just the ultra efficient heat pump systems that are improving every year in terms of their efficiency. So we noticed in the report that today's highly efficient heat pump systems were not used as the numbers to calculate peaks. So we could definitely update that, and presumably those numbers have a trend and are going down, efficiency going up and cost going down over time. So that is not really explored very concretely in this report. It's obviously pretty hazy at this point, and things are changing fast, but I think the report, from our perspective, gives the idea that just based on this relatively cursory look, it's feasible and affordable for Palo Alto to go down this route. Just looking at the last table, the bottom line for gas transition, if you financed over 30 years, you'd be at about $10 a month, which is the
Brett?
base charge for gas.
Brett, you're well over 3 minutes, if it's all right to wrap it up.
Okay, just wrapping up. So the final thing I wanted to convey here is that this report really is a great starting point, and I don't think we need to invest a lot of time defining all the assumptions and really dotting the I's and crossing the T's here. It's a ballpark figure that gives us the courage to go forward with what we need to focus on now, which is really replacing all the devices that are failing with electric devices and introducing the programming, financing, and even the rules and ordinances that will require us to do that starting very soon. So this, the conversion of the whole gas system becomes much clearer and manageable in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, the next public speaker is Tom Cabot.
Hello, this is Tom Cabot. I'm a retired senior resource planner from Palo Alto's utilities for 30 years. I retired in about 2013. Thank you very much for taking a look at this issue. It's one of the things that seems most important to have a community like Palo Alto be able to take a look at, with the control over both the gas and electric utilities and so much exposure to sea level rise, and knowing the importance of being able to show a leadership role and producing the kind of study that other utilities will be able to use to explore getting on board with modernizing the way they meet end use needs. The end use needs for cooking and for staying warm and heating water. They don't have to be done with chemical energy, as you can tell from the report. They can be done with electricity. This report was an ambitious effort, and it has areas where I think it can improve. As Brett mentioned, I think it's using outdated efficiencies for the heat pump equipment that are overstating the electrical peak demand of the heat pump equipment by a factor of 2 compared to this year's equipment. And over the next 10 years, equipment will get better, as Brett mentioned. So now that the structure of this report has been put together, it won't be that hard to turn the crank and roll through with modernized assumptions to refine the answer. And I think it will be a more encouraging picture. And the other thing is, we need to keep remembering that it costs money to fight climate change, but climate change itself is not free either. So it's not like, you can save the money by not attacking it. Anyway, I'm very proud of you guys over there in Palo Alto for taking this project on, and I wish you all luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public indicating they want to speak?
No, there are not.
All right, then why don't we move ahead to the staff presentation. Thank you very much, both Brett and Tom, for calling in. So
I'll just give a very brief introduction. Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director, Utilities Resource Management. Just putting these analyses in context, the Utilities Department is engaging pretty heavily with the City Sustainability Department in running analyses on the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update for 2020. And we also are we're also working on some parallel analyses, including the 2 that you're going to see tonight, related to the utility impacts of the SCAP, to give us some confidence in moving forward. The 2 presentations you're hearing tonight were done by 2 very talented fellows that we had here over the summer. And so I will let them take this from here. And I will just note that these are, just due to the staffing constraints and the high amount of analysis that's required both for the SCAP and for these side analyses, there are some limitations on the level of detail that we can go into. But we went into some very significant detail here, and I think we've gotten some very good results to help us move forward confidently with the SCAP. So with that, I'll introduce Christine Tam, Senior Resource Planner, and Elizabeth Oliphant, who was our summer fellow.
Hello everyone. My name is Elizabeth Oliphant. I'm going to start sharing my screen and this presentation. So, yeah. Okay. Can all of you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, let me just, okay, well, I'll get started then. Thank you, commissioners, for letting me speak tonight about the results from the electrification impact study that I conducted with Christine Tam over the summer. And this was an analysis of the total utility costs for electrifying single-family residences in Palo Alto. Oh, So a little bit of the motivation behind this project. The main goal for electrifying single-family homes is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and thus help Palo Alto stick to the SCAP goals that have been laid out. And the scope of this project was single-family residents in Palo Alto, of which there are about 15,000. And tonight I'm going to be presenting on the utility costs, which include upgrading the electrical system and disconnecting gas lines in the city of Palo Alto. So first off, what is electrification? It's replacing all of those residential gas appliances with all electric appliances. So this means that your water heater will become a heat pump water heater instead of a traditional gas water heater. The stoves will become induction cooktops, and gas dryers will be replaced with electric dryers, as well as gas heating systems will be replaced with air source heat pumps. So first, I'm going to talk about the electrical upgrades associated with this, this change. So electrifying all of those gas appliances will increase the peak electricity demand by almost 3 times. And as you can see in this graph on the left, it will be a winter peaking load, mainly due to heating in those air source heat pumps. And this blue line is a mixed fuel house, and the orange line is an all electric. So it's almost 3 times a higher peak demand. And it also is going to be a higher annual energy use. So this will affect different customer bills. So a little bit of an overview about the electrical system in the city of Palo Alto. So the city of Palo Alto utilities is largely not in charge of generating their own electricity. This is handled by outside companies, and along with the long-range transmission. The city of Palo Alto buys its electricity at different substations around the city, and then using primary feeders that are higher voltage, transmits this electricity throughout the city, has different transformers that step down the electricity and then transmit it to houses. So with a higher peak demand, many of those transformers will need to be upgraded. So to determine how many transformers will need to be upgraded, I looked at the appliance load increases and a potential for EV load as well. So for EV load, there were 2 scenarios that I considered. One was an optimistic flexible load. And in this scenario, the peak demand did not increase with additional electric vehicles. So instead of a higher load, it was just the load that you saw in the slides before, which was about 3 times the current load. For the more conservative EV scenario, I added 9.74 kilowatts per transformer. And this number comes from an estimate of how much the average Palo Alto residents drive, the fact that we are assuming high EV penetration, so about 2 EVs per house and about 8 houses per transformer. So in both scenarios, I found that over 95% of the around 800 transformers that are serving single-family residences will be overcapacity. And these overcapacity transformers can be replaced in 2 different ways. They can either be replaced with a like-for-like upgrade. So one pad-mounted transformer becomes 2 pad-mounted transformers, or maybe 3. Or it can be an optimized upgrade, which means that a pole-mounted transformer can become a pad-mounted transformer, and thus be able to withstand a higher capacity. So to determine the number of transformers needed, I looked at that increased load and then scaled it based on that. So for costs for the transformer upgrades, if we go with the like-for-like upgrade strategy, we're looking at a minimum cost in the optimistic flexible load scenario of around $12.5 million, and a maximum cost in the conservative scenario of around $32.9 million. If we do optimize upgrades, we're looking at a minimum cost of around $8.3 million for the optimistic flexible load scenario, and a maximum cost for the conservative scenario of around $25.4 million. And once again, this optimized scenario is upgrading a pole mounted with perhaps a pad mounted or a different type of transformer. There are also going to be other electrical upgrades that will need to happen with this increased load. So around 20% of the secondary transmission lines are expected to be over capacity, and these cost anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 per secondary transmission line to replace. Additionally, around 25% of the feeder lines are expected to be over capacity, and these are much more expensive to replace at a cost of $1 to $2 million. So for these other upgrades, we're looking at anywhere from $21.4 million to $41.7 million. There also are going to be costs associated with the gas disconnection. So for the gas disconnection, we are looking at disconnecting all 15,000 single-family residents, but this does not mean the entire gas system will be removed. Instead, a skeleton gas system will remain throughout the city and connect those commercial customers with the gas system and multifamily customers as well. So in terms of what types of disconnections we're looking at, there's three main types. You have main lines, which in the picture on the right, you can see it's that larger yellow line labeled 1. So that's a main line. And these connect multiple houses to the gas system. Then there are service lines, which connect to individual houses, and that's labeled 2 on the graph on the right. And then each house also has a meter and riser. So all of the estimates you're about to see come from an estimate of $640 per hour, which covers a 4-person crew and all the overhead expenses associated with this crew. Something I want to stress is that the costs per hour will be different if outside contractors are used and instead of CPA staff. So a bit more on the gas disconnection. In the picture on the right, you can see more of these main lines, which, as I said before, are larger pipes that serve several customers. And these mains are usually sealed at the valves, which are these circles that you can see at the different corners. So sealing a main at a valve disconnects all the service lines that are connected to the main. But something that's critical to note is that all customers have to agree to disconnection to be able to seal that main. So if one customer does not want to disconnect, it can either delay the project or make it so the main cannot be sealed. And service lines connect to individual houses. And I considered 2 different scenarios for service lines, depending on if customers agree to disconnection all at the same time or if they do not. And then in all cases, every single family residence meter and riser will need to be disconnected by a professional meter technician. So for the costs, in both of the scenarios that I considered, 1,640 mains are going to be sealed, and all 15,008 meters and risers will need to be sealed. For the optimistic scenario, I determined that only houses on the skeleton gas system will need their service line disconnected individually. So this means that around 2,500 service lines will need to be sealed individually because, as I said before, once you seal a main at a valve, it automatically disconnects the service lines on that main. In the more conservative scenario, I said that all houses will need their service lines disconnected individually. So all 15,000, so much larger number. In terms of total costs, for the optimistic case, we're looking at a minimum of $11,400,000 and a maximum of $16.7 million. For the conservative case, we're looking at anywhere from $31.2 million to $53.7 million. So there is a large range in these costs, but it likely is going to fall somewhere in the middle because some customers will agree to disconnection and others will not. There also are large cost savings associated with sealing up the mains. So CPAU runs a gas main replacement program, which aims to replace 2 to 4 miles of PVC piping every single year. So by preemptively sealing up these PVC pipes, we can avoid the costs associated with replacing them, which aren't small. For the 23 miles of gas PVC mains and service lines, we can estimate there'll be a saving of anywhere from 26 to 34 million, which if you remember from the costs on the slide before, that is around the costs for the optimistic scenario of sealing up all these pipes. So the grand total that we have to electrify single family residents, it's going to cost the utility anywhere from $41.1 million to $128.3 million. And if we use a 30-year 3.2 financing rate, this equals an annual utility cost that ranges between 2.2 million and 6.7 million. There also are going to be additional staff hours that will be required for this project. So to determine this, I use different breakdowns of costs for the electrical operations upgrades. So these breakdowns were labor plus parts, and I looked at the labor costs, and then I used a rate of $152 per hour. The staffing impact on gas operations, I determined based on a per hour estimate that was provided by engineering. And I got a grand total of anywhere from 200,000 to 800,000 staff hours that will be needed to do these upgrades. But this is not the only staff hours that will be needed, because there are going to be more staff hours for engineering design and processing of permits as well. These numbers are just for the upgrades and the disconnection of gas line. So yes, thank you for your time tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now.
I'd like to just add a couple of things. First off, thank you, Liz, for your presentation. This was a very complete analysis. I think when we talked a couple of months ago, there were sort of three high-level questions that we keep looking at here. First, what are going to be the utility impacts, and what are going to be the costs to deal with those utility impacts? What are the staffing impacts going to be? And we're asking that question in part because there are real logistical issues with staffing. I mean, it's not just about the cost. For example, there just simply isn't room to host additional crews at some of our facilities, and contracting has its own complexities. So those are things that we have to address. The last topic, and this isn't addressed tonight, and I'm sure that people have this question in their mind, is what would be the impacts? What rates would customers pay if you were to disconnect all of the single family homes? What would the remaining customers pay? We're in the process of doing that analysis. We're hoping to bring you some results in January. I also just want to acknowledge that it's highly likely that there will continue to be more electrification and potentially disconnection of multifamily and commercial sectors. We are pretty familiar with the technologies that are needed for electrification in single family homes. It's more complex to electrify those multifamily and commercial sectors, and also those sectors can be a little bit more cost sensitive. And so having the ability to have a transitional strategy where we serve only those customers for a while helping them make substantial reductions in their natural gas use could be really important in creating a flexibility in the path we follow to achieve our SCAP goals. So that's one of the objectives here, and I just want to note before we start the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director Abendschein. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Let's see, I see Commissioner Smith has his hand up already. Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Liz, for the presentation. It was quite thorough. I very much enjoyed it. Jonathan, also, I too agree with you that having a transition plan in place is not only prudent, but I think it's wise. The one thing, I guess my question and my thought is not so much about whether or not we should do this, but if we do this, are we looking at all the possible scenarios for the pipe that's already in the ground? And to that end, we currently have hired Magellan to do some significant work with respect to planning of our fiber network. Have we looked at the possibility of using some of the decommissioned pipe associated with this as a possible route for some of the fiber and distribution of fiber across the city of Palo Alto? And the reason why I bring this up, when I read through the report, it seemed quite thorough. It was great. But one thing that I think would reduce the total cost associated with doing this, certainly from a labor perspective and a decommissioning perspective, is to actually repurpose the pipe for some other use. And fiber obviously rose to the top. So I guess my question is for Jonathan or perhaps Dean, is that something part of our analysis? Are we going to look at this, or have we already ruled this out?
So Commissioner Smith, so we have asked Magellan to take a look at the commission lines that we have in the ground right now today, looking at our water lines or looking at our gas lines. I'm not sure if the timing is going to be right for this. You know, this decommissioning of this gas system is going to take time. We're talking probably, 15, 20 years down the road. If we're able and moving forward with, we'll just say, fiber to the home, it may be sooner than this period of time. But as we shut off sections of it, we would definitely look at, sections of the gas main that we could use, because we could use the gas main as well as the services that are going up to the side of the homes. We would probably cut the risers, as Elizabeth talked about, but we probably wouldn't remove those risers. So yes, the question is, or the answer to your question is yes, we are asking Magellan to take a look at that and to look at their high level design of using the existing lines that are being decommissioned today. As the city is right now, probably half of the city's gas system is all high pressure main plastic pipe. So, we can take advantage of that as we build the system out.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's great news. Thanks, Dean.
Let's see, Commissioner Danaher and then Commissioner Jackson.
Sure. Elizabeth, thank you. Great presentation. Really appreciate it. I was wondering if there are other offsetting cost savings. For example, how much of these upgrades would we have to do just for the EV initiatives? If we didn't do this other part, would that consume part of that cost anyways? How much would we have to replace transformers because they need maintenance or they're near end of life? How much I guess you already said we'll save on replacing gas lines if we decommission. But are some of those expenses already ones that are going to have to occur, or additional savings from otherwise in the system? Have you had a chance to that in?
So I did not look exactly at different transformers and when their end of life is, but in terms of for the EV analysis, the next presentation I think is on EVs, and there will have to be some upgrades associated with EVs, especially with how quickly they are coming onto the market. And in particular, if by the time this electrification project is done, there is more flexible load technology. Some of those upgrades that will be for the EVs could help with this project later down the line. Once there is that flexible load technology, they can kind of Yeah, so if there's upgrades in the short term for EVs, that will definitely cover, I think, some of the costs.
Offset some of the costs. Okay, thanks.
And Commissioner, I'll just add that there so yeah, Liz did include the electric vehicle upgrade overlap, but there are probably some there's some replacements that need to happen to the system that probably will overlap with the replacements that need to be done, or the upgrades that need to be done for the building electrification. And so this is you're right. This is a little bit of an upper end estimate in that some of those replacements
the marginal cost might be less.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And all right.
Actually,
we'll look at it,
can I
say
also jump in
transport.
and respond to that question? So hi, this is Christine. I'm Senior Resource Planner. I worked with Liz on the analysis, and even if Palo Alto does not pursue any electrification of the single family homes, but if we need to meet our SCAP goals, which assumes pretty much 90% of the passenger vehicles owned by the community will have to be EVs, converted from internal combustion engine cars to EVs. We will have to the city will have to follow a similar upgrade of all the electric grid system. Essentially, the additional load on each of the transformers will be very similar to converting all the existing mixed fuel homes to all electric homes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Christine. Second question is, I understand in some cases why there was such a big delta between the min and the max, particularly on the gas, or you closing it off at the main or as a household. But wow, it's like more than double between min and max cost under the conservative assessment, for example, for transformers and other things. What makes that such a wide spread? Is it a question of using city labor versus contract labor? Or, where do the spreads come from?
So for the transformer upgrades in the like for like, and as well as in the optimized as well, it more has to do with how over capacity the transformers are. So what I saw was that a lot of transformers are quite close to capacity already. So if you then multiply that by several times, because of the difference, it was kind of tripping an extra need for even more transformers. So instead of just one more transformer, they needed 2 more transformers, or especially also if we want to keep a 20% delta for changes in the load. So
I can understand
and then,
those assumptions show up in the difference between and the max.
Yeah.
Okay.
There also is a large cost estimate difference between different types of transformers. So I do believe I have, let me see if I have a breakdown of, no, I don't have a slide with a breakdown of the exact cost for transformers, but there was a large cost difference associated with.
Right. Yeah, those kind of spreads are in different parts of this, but that gives me a good flavor of it. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Was there, or is there going to be an attempt to say, if we did all this, how much are we saving per $1 million? How much carbon are we saving? And can we save more with that money doing something else? That's probably outside the scope of your task.
Actually, if we electrify all of the single family homes, we save 49,000 metric tons of carbon, which will be an additional, which will get us 15% to where we need to be from our current carbon emissions to the 80-30 goal.
I think also one of the things we're finding, and I think this is going to be a complicated part of the SCAP discussion next spring, is that we're not in a situation where we're picking and choosing from among a menu of different pathways that we can follow, or different strategies that we can use to achieve our goals. It's really, to achieve 80% reductions is an all of the above approach. And so we haven't done a lot comparing cost per ton between this strategy and other strategies. I mean, that'll be something we'll try to take a look at in the SCAP, but I think what you're going to find is that it's really an all of the above approach rather than a comparison between different options, unless you want to balance, unless you want to trade off between electrifying equipment in town versus paying for carbon reduction measures outside of Palo Alto. That's where those comparisons come in. And this is something I know that has been, we've talked about a lot in the past, and I'd be happy to talk offline with you just to make sure we're addressing those questions.
All right, thanks, John. No more questions from me at the moment anyways.
All right, thanks. Commissioner Jackson. Yep, go ahead.
First, I just wanted to say to Ms. Oliphant, this is a really great report, great research, and I appreciate the effort and the result. It's very nice. It's very helpful. So thank you. Great project. I have a bunch of questions that are probably more for the CPAU staff here, but so I guess a question that lingers in my mind is like, what percentage of the 15,000 single family homes are at 100 amp service today, 200 amp service versus 400 amp service? Because I guess I'll just leave it there for, do we have any idea of what that breakdown is?
Commissioner Jackson, we do have that breakdown. Can we get back to you with the answer?
Sure, absolutely, that's fine. What my follow on, just since we're going to talk about it again in the future, is that, you know, it's my opinion, and I'm no expert yet, but based on my experience and my calculations of my own home, it seems to me that 200 amps is where many homes will have to be. And so if the number was like now a whole bunch of homes are at 100 amps, I think that would be an impact. So,
yes,
a bunch of homes that would, if there was a bunch of homes that were getting 100 amp service today and they would have to move to 200 amps, which I believe that many of these all electric homes will have to be at 200 amps service. So that will be an impact. But again, we can have this conversation at a future time. We don't need to have it right now. Okay.
Yes. I think it would it's definitely under 30% in terms of the number of homes, of single family homes still with 100 amp electric panel.
Oh, that's good news. I'm glad to hear that. Another question, just and again, you may not know the answer to this, but what's the expected lifetime of a distribution transformer or a feeder, just in round numbers?
So Commissioner Jackson, usually the life expectancy on a transformer is anywhere between 40 to 60 years. On a feeder line, feeder line's about the same. An aerial feeder line, we'll get a little bit more out of an underground. We have some underground feeder portions of it where we'll gain maybe another 10 to 15, 20 years out of those. But, depending on where they're located, what's going on with them. But anyway, average 50 to 60 years.
Okay, so you put them in and they need to last for a long time, or they're expected to last for a long time.
Exactly, yes.
And I think this kind of gets at something to Commissioner Danner was saying, but I'm sort of saying it in response. It seems to me that unless, all electric homes and EV usage, and this study also shows usage is going to go way up. Electrical usage is going to go way up. So we need to be thinking that we need to, now how much needs to go up, we can all debate and we can all try to do a better job and do things like that, which we should all do, but it's going to go up. So we should start thinking about how we're going to invest and when we can invest to start, it's not going to be the same. It's going to have to go up if we're going to go do this. So I just wanted to make that point that a lot of this work's going to have to get done. To what degree is an open question. And then I think finally, to again, another comment about to what degree, I think this whole issue about the the EV loads and loads in general, there's sort of the conservative and the optimistic flexible load. This whole issue about flexible loads, I think, harks back to the discussion we had last month about, time of use rates and whether they're, static or dynamic. and how much you can really load shift. You can motivate consumers to shift their loads more dramatically. And I just think that's another, although there's a lot of IT sort of infrastructure that needs to be required to enable that kind of thing. And there's also, if you don't do it, people aren't going to shift their loads, and then you have to pay for it for all this other stuff. So I think that, you know, pick your poison there. And I think that using less, or maybe moving people, motivating people to move their usage way out is probably really in our best interest, even if it's going to cost, there's going to be sort of a big IT and billing investment to enable that kind of thing. So I guess that's the point I wanted to make there. And that's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Scharf, and then Vice Chair Siegel.
Thank you. I actually think Commissioner Jackson makes a good point, which he didn't really follow up on it, and I understand we can leave it for another time, but you know, it's not just 100 to 200, it's 200 to 400. And for some people, it's 400 to 600. You know, I have a 400 amp at my house, and I'm running out of electrical capacity after I build my ADU in the back. I want to put another EV charger, and my contractor's like, well, if you have to expand your panel, that'll be $50,000. It's a lot of money. So I guess my question is a little bit, I mean, I think this is a great report, but I think it deals with the costs of what it's going to cost the city, which is obviously an issue, but I don't think that's the limiting factor. I think the limiting factor on this is, first of all, I don't think anyone in Palo Alto has an idea that we're doing this. And you've seen this with other things where we've built bike paths along roads and narrowed the roads. People pay no attention until it's actually happening. When we tell people we're going to disconnect their gas and they're going to have to spend, and I guess that's really the question, what are they going to have to spend? Are they going to have to spend 10,000? Are they going to have to spend 20,000? Or what are they going to have to spend to electrify their home? And then how well does the technology actually work? And I'm waiting for Commissioner Jackson to finish electrifying his home, because then I want to come over and take a shower and see how it works. You didn't know that yet, did you, Commissioner Jackson? But I'm totally serious. I think that the limiting factor on this is, what is it going to cost people? We have a lot of people in Palo Alto that are on fixed incomes. We have, you know, a lot of people that are going to really balk at this idea. And then the other notion is, we're going to expect them to buy a new car while we do this. And we expect all of this to happen in the next 10 years. And we're spending significant resources thinking about this. And I recognize that. I just think that we really need to figure out what it's going to cost the people in Palo Alto if we do this. And is the city going to pay for it? Is this going to be a socialized cost where we basically pay for people to electrify their homes? And if we are going to do it that way, then I suggest that we start paying for electrifying homes now, so that people's homes are electrified and you have less pushback. I just don't see it. I mean, if you came to me tomorrow and said, you have 2 years to electrify your house, I'd be like, really? I mean, I have to spend the money now, I have to go through this process? And I'd probably vote against anyone who wanted to do that, frankly. I mean, I think it's a longer term process, and I think that we need to figure out a good way to implement this. And I really appreciate the report, but I mean, if it's on the high end or the low end, it's probably not the limiting factor. And so I guess I'd like to see us putting some estimates together about what it would really cost your average homeowner if we did this. And I think we'd have to look more granularly than we normally do. So my recollection of being on finance committees, every time we raise rates, we say, the average customer will get X bill. And that bill is always like some small amount of money, because we're taking in apartments versus single family homes, and it's not really the average bill. So if we're going to look at single family homes, I think we have to say, what's it going to cost, not the average single family home, what's it going to cost a single family home with these characteristics, how many do we have in the city of these different homes? How many have 100 amps, 200 amps? And if we electrify them, what will it cost? So we have some sense, and then we got to figure out, are we going to pay for this, or are we going to ask people to pay for this? So that's really where I think if we're actually going to do this, we need to come up with that kind of a plan, as opposed to just, it's going to cost X number of dollars to the city and we can afford it over X number of years, because I don't think that'll work. But anyway, that's really the point I wanted to make. Thanks.
Commissioner, can I just speak to that for just a moment? Because first off, I agree with everything that you're saying right there. And we are doing exactly that kind of analysis right now. These, and in fact, a lot of that analysis has actually been done. I do want to make sure that I give some credit here to Liz, because she did an enormous amount of exactly that type of analysis over the summer that we're preparing to include in the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. It's just that we're not ready to release that information yet until we're able to incorporate it into a full SCAP costing, financing, and financing plan with a variety of policy options that the council can look at. And we do want to make sure we introduce that in front of the council first with appropriate public engagement as well, so the community can process it. So I'll just stop there.
No, that was very helpful. I actually didn't know that we were that far along in doing that.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's
it's November is a real focus period for us on exactly those topics.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Vice Chair Siegel, and then Commissioner Johnston.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the report, Liz. Really appreciate it. I've been wondering about this for a while and whether it's even feasible to electrify. It looks like it's feasible. I want to just reiterate what Commissioners Jackson and Scharf have already said about the economics to the customer. So the other piece that I wanted to ask about is, one, there's this huge staff requirement, and it looks like we're talking about over a 10-year period. That's a long time to be hiring staff. We don't have, we have challenges every year hiring staff, and I don't know how we're going to get a crew that can do that kind of work. And it looks like about 40 people a year, if I'm doing my math right. I'm kind of splitting the max and minimum time for 10 plus years. And so there's the staff piece of 10 plus years and the commitment of the same crew for 10 plus years, or the economics of having to train over and over. And then there's also on the customer side, if we're, on day one, we have this neighborhood or the houses on this main who are shut off, and it's not for 10 years until we have the last one. So there's a lot of, I don't know, fairness impacts on both sides. For those who are eager to electrify, they may have to wait 10 years. And for those, and they're paying for gas that they may or may not be interested in receiving. Anyway, and then there's the ones who are going on the front end who may be forced to acquire new gas appliances that they weren't necessarily in the market for, they weren't yet in the market for appliances. So I just think something that's that big a range that has disparate impact over that time is something we really need to think about.
Wholeheartedly agree with that comment. And I think that the wide range comes from the desire to actually be able to accommodate people's desire to electrify at whatever point in this 10-year process that they want to electrify. And so what happens is you might allow someone to electrify, then you go out, you send that crew out, you cut off their gas service. They're no longer paying for the gas service, but you're having to dig down and cut that individual gas service rather than cutting off the entire block all at once. And so it ends up costing more. So I think you're exactly right in picking the middle range for the amount of staff time that's going to be needed, because some people are going to electrify ahead of time. Some people are going to electrify at about the right time that we can cut off the entire block. And, but I think you're right that we do need to accommodate people. We can't force people to buy gas infrastructure when they don't want it. And the reverse will also be true, that there will be people who aren't ready when it's really time for us to remove that whole block, and we might need to develop programs for education or incentives when it's really worthwhile for us to disconnect a whole block, and there's that one holdout that we need to address. So you're putting your finger on a lot of issues, logistical issues, practical issues that we're going to have to think about, and that's part of what this survey was, or sorry, this analysis was trying to get at.
Yeah, unanimity in Palo Alto,
Yeah.
Good luck with that. And then the only other comment I wanted to say is, we've been talking about the need for upgrading the transformers, and seems like we should be like, chop on that, because our entire SCAP plan depends on having the electrical infrastructure for the EVs. And if we're going down the electrification route, and that's the first piece, right? So I'd hate to have everything be delayed because we're not doing the part that we know we need to do now.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnston?
Yes, thank you. I too want to congratulate Liz on this report. I mean, I think it's really useful to have all of this information in one place, because it makes some things, to me at least, makes some things really clear that I think were not clear in my own mind. And I want to kind of follow up on some of the comments that Commissioner Scharf made. What I get out of all of this is the importance that if we're really serious about doing something in 10 years, we have to be doing it now. We have to start on it now. And a very important aspect is going to be public education, getting the community to be on board with this plan, because it's going to make a huge change in people's lives, as well as a big cost. And for example, if we can get people to agree to this and agree as a neighborhood on it, we save a tremendous amount of money on the gas disconnection costs. But that's not going to be easy to do. In fact, I think it's going to be very difficult to do. And if we really want to do it, and we want to get it done in 10 years, and we want to try to avoid some of this expenses, we've got to be starting now with a major education program. And I think maybe after the SCAP analysis is done, so you look at not only the cost to the city, but the cost to the to the individual customers, that would be the time to really put something together, go out to the community and say, this is what it means to achieve our 80 by 30 goal. And we really need people to buy into this. So that's my comment. Thank you.
So Commissioner Johnson, so as I mentioned earlier, I agree with you and Commissioner Scharf about that. We haven't really done a lot about communications out to the public and to the community very much at all. And I think that, we're slowly getting around to that portion of it. As I mentioned in my update, there's this new collaboration that we've been doing about building decarbonization, about this switch on, which is all about electrification, and that we are going to start campaigning heavily with in November and December. And then we also have to do much more informational holding with the community itself, getting the stakeholders involved. Because I agree with you. I think that it's going to be difficult for us to try to find and believe that we're going to get blocks and blocks and blocks that are going to go ahead and shut off and want to go in this direction. But I think the thing is that we need to make sure that we're moving in this direction. And as Vice Chair Siegel had talked about, is that once we get into these modes where we're going to start doing these, we need to look at, if we're changing out a transformer today, we should be looking at upsizing that transformer. As in Elizabeth's studies, we have all these transformers, and if you think that we're going to do it all in 1 year, it's never going to happen like that. So, we are looking at as simple as growing the size of the poles. So in case we want to put fiber on top of it, we need to start looking at the same thing about looking at what these transformers need and what that capacity is going to look like. And if that means that we have to look at blocks and consider that every home is going to be that way, maybe that's the way we need to look at how we size our transformers from now on. I mean, granted, it's not as efficient because that load's not going to be on that transformer. But again, there's ways that we can take a look at that, because The other thing that I'm concerned about is that we start upsizing a lot of these transformers. That means the whole footprint, the base, what the transformer sits on, has to be taken out because they don't fit the same size as you grow in the size of the transformers. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that, we need to do now is get the word and put a plan together on how we're going to communicate this information out.
And I think the communication plan has got to be kind of more comprehensive and more aggressive, I think, than we typically do, because this really is going to affect everybody, and we really do need to get everybody or most people to buy into it. So it's more than simply, inserts in the utility bill and so on. It really is going to have to be a major public education effort.
Absolutely agree.
Thanks, Commissioner Johnston. Let's see, I don't have a lot to add that other people haven't already brought up. One thing that's kind of unclear in the report, well, because it hasn't been decided, but we're sort of dancing around, is this a voluntary action, or is this, or will it be a city mandate to roll out with the obvious, actually, I won't even say will, I'll say would, if the city proceeds with this. But on the note of what did Commissioner Sharp say? People have no idea it's coming, which I think is very true. In fact, I informally asked a few friends this weekend, like, hey, what would you think if the city, cut off your gas service? They're like, wait, what? Who? And I guess the issue of cost to customers has been brought up. I think there's also, a lot of people just like natural gas. And so the challenge, the communication and education challenge is, I think, even more than the usual. I would love if there was a way to get to where people were as excited about this happening to the city as they are about a new park or new library or some like really cool thing that the city is doing. And emphasizing, I think Carbon Free Palo Alto brought this up in the email, emphasizing other benefits besides climate change, because not everybody gets excited about reducing our city's carbon footprint, but the safety, indoor pollution, sort of whatever we've got, excitement about new appliances, because we also have to mitigate, it's a pain in the butt to replace your appliances, even when they're at end of life. You might prefer to just kind of get with the new model of whatever you already have. So there are clearly very significant challenges beyond the financial. And I wonder if there could be kind of a pilot block, a pioneer block, a community that maybe has already formed. Like I don't know much about the Cool Blocks program, but if there was a Cool Block that maybe wanted to be first in on this and somehow could be turned into a showcase about how wonderful life is without gas. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. Anyway, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for the analysis and the report. I think all of my other questions are just picky and detail-y, and I can follow up later in the interests of time. So looks like Commissioner Jackson has one more thing to say. And then I know Councilmember Cormack has some comments.
Yeah, I agree with everyone, my fellow commissioners, about the need and the impact of public education here. I think it's going to be a very, very serious challenge. So with that in mind, and just trying to tie in what Commissioner Smith was asking about earlier, in the spirit of carrots and sticks, a carrot could be, hey, Block, if you electrify, we will run fiber to your houses through your old gas pipes, and we're not going to do it until you do it. So anyway, something to think about, because that could be a major carrot to help wash down the bitter taste of the other associated costs and paying of electrification. So just something to think about. Obviously, we're not going to decide to do that tonight. Ha ha ha.
No, but what we're also thinking about too, to just add on to that is that, and this is a big issue throughout the community, and I know that all of you as well as the council have heard about this, is undergrounding. So one of the things that City Manager Shikata and I have been talking about is that if we could find a block, we'll do everything. We'll underground it. We'll go ahead and put fiber in. At the same time, we'll electrify everything. I think that those could be some more carrots that we could throw towards this. So there's different options that we are definitely looking at right now.
That's very exciting thinking. Look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, I appreciate the creative ideation there. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you so much, Chair Forcell. Ms. Oliphant, thank you, as everyone else has said, for this presentation. I want to particularly compliment you on the really effective use of visuals. So while this is a relatively sophisticated audience here, not everyone else reviewing it will know how our electrical system works or what the difference is between a main and a customer service line is. So thank you very much for spending the time to do that. That will make this more helpful to a broader audience. And I have to say, when I was listening to you talk about the skeleton gas system, I had this image of a Halloween costume. So I'll look forward to seeing, next year when people actually dress up for Halloween, maybe some of the utilities staff will want to be a skeleton gas system. I can only imagine what that'll look like. I also had one or two questions that are quite small, but the one that I think I will ask is just understanding the difference. I'm on slide 8 between the like-for-like upgrades and the optimized upgrades. It's not clear to me if the optimized upgrade is about future capacity, aesthetics, safety, maintenance, like what makes it optimum if we do an optimum upgrade instead of a like-for-like?
It's more about the capacity of the transformers. So
Okay.
instead of having 3 pole mounted transformers, we can replace it with 1 pad mounted transformer, which could
Okay.
then potentially carry extra load as well.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. And then with respect to the comments that commissioners made, yes, we need to get people to buy in literally. There's a lot to buy if people are going to be making these changes. And I think this is really a campaign as opposed to education. So mixing the metaphors of carrots and sticks and fiber, I'm not even sure where we would go with that, but not very many people in the community do understand that this is being contemplated. I think the work that we're doing here today is an essential part of contemplating what we will do. And I don't know what we will decide, right? But without the work that that Ms. Oliphant has started for us here today, we won't be able to present the case to help us understand how we should move forward. So I think it's a very crucial and wonderful first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As this is a discussion item, there's no motion or anything. And I think we've been at it for a while, so this is a good time for a break before we come back and discuss our last topic and finish up. So let's see, by my clock it's 6:24. Why don't we come back at 6:35 and pick back up? Thanks, everybody.
Councilwoman Cormack, are you still there or did you sign off?
I think she might have taken off.
Okay, I'll catch her in a minute. Thank you.
All right.
I thought I misunderstood that. I thought you said it.
So I don't know who's around. I'm curious if anybody listening can hear my daughter practicing beginning trumpet in the background.
Just lightly, slightly.
Yes, me too.
Okay.
It's pleasant. It's fine.
The
A musical interlude.
it'd be better if it was advanced, softer
She's doing
instrument.
great.
Like beginning trumpet is particularly
It
challenging.
may be more pleasant on our side of Zoom than on yours.
Oh, I love it. I'm just worried about the effect on the overall Zoom.
It's ever so faint.
Yes.
All right, let's see. Quick visual. Looks, are we short a couple commissioners? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, no, I think we're good. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started again. Final item of new business, a discussion of discussion of electric vehicle charger needs in order to reach 80% EV penetration by 2030. And I will remember this time to first see if there are any members of the public who want to comment.
I do not see any hands raised. Chair.
Alrighty.
So.
Okay, then why don't we go ahead with the, if there's a staff presentation.
Shiva, are you introducing Mo? You're on mute, Shiva.
Shiva.
You're muted.
Jonathan is planning to introduce us. Can you wait for Jonathan?
No, go for it.
No, go for it. That's fine.
All right. So this is Mo Sodabatana. She's another fellow from Stanford for this year. And this is a project, almost like a companion project to Lisa's presentation. And the idea was to come up with a framework to look at the EV charger needs if 80% penetration of EVs was achieved in Palo Alto. So with that, Mo, could you take it away?
Good evening, commissioners, and thank you for letting me present today, and thank you, Shiva, for the introduction. And I will now share my slide. All right, so today I will present to you my findings on the electric vehicle charger assessment needs to achieve 80% EV penetration in Palo Alto. A quick overview of my presentation project. I'll go over the project objective, framework for analysis, present results, and then leave with some key takeaways. So the project objective is to understand how many chargers Palo Alto will need to support LSCAP goal of 80% penetration, as well as determine what types of chargers are needed. I'll also look at the cost estimates of installations, equipment, and upgrade relating to those chargers. And so as we all know, here are the 3 types of EV chargers. So we have the level 1, level 2, and DC fast, and the different chargers vary with charging time and also cost of installation and equipment. So a framework for my analysis. So first I looked at the current EV trends in Palo Alto, charging patterns, and also existing infrastructure. And then I looked at the forecast for EVs in Palo Alto by 2030 and what that would look like with 80% penetration. And then I estimated the number as well as type of charging ports needed. I did an in-depth analysis also for multifamily properties. And then lastly, I did a cost estimate on the utility side and also customer side. So here are the Palo Alto community statistics. So on the residential side, Palo Alto has 65,000 residents living in 25,000 households, split between single family residents and multifamily residents. On the vehicle side, Palo Alto has 52,000 vehicles registered, and as you can see in the figure, 9% are currently EVs. On the non-residential side, so these are commuters to Palo Alto and government and commercial, Palo Alto supports 70,000 jobs, and we estimate about 50,000 vehicles drive in daily, and of which, looking at Bay Area statistics, we approximate 6 to 10% are EVs. And then on the existing infrastructure for Palo Alto, so we estimate based off of the current number of EVs that are registered to single family residents, and also we approximate the numbers for multifamily. And then we also took into account permits for L2 chargers. And with those numbers, we have an estimate for the single family residential L1, L2, multifamily L2, and non-residential L2s as well. For DC fast, we know for sure there's 30 charging ports currently. So for a total of approximately 4,000 charging ports. On the residential EV charging port estimate, so here in table 2, I've summarized the total number of EVs projected. So currently on the residential side, we have about 4,000 EVs, and with 80% penetration, it'll be 42,000. And the charging ports needed to support that would be about 18 to 26,000. And this number comes from the data that we have that in Palo Alto, there's approximately 2.1 cars per household. And so 2.5 cars for single family and 1.5 for multifamily. And then also, as I want to point out that we're estimating more L2 chargers in the future because L1 chargers are likely to not be applicable with longer range EVs. On the non-residential side, these charging port estimates are based off of Cal ETC white paper and also NREL CEC EVI Pro tool. And so here you can see on the table that currently we have 4,800 EVs, and this is including commuters and also commercial and governmental vehicles. And then for an 80%, we expect 54,000 EVs, and the charging port we would need for that is about 6,000 to 12,000. And then here is an overview of the cost estimate approach that I took. So here you can see that there are 5 main components to the electrical infrastructure for EV chargers. I'll primarily look at these 4 primary distribution, secondary distribution, and then on the customer side, the make ready and the charging port. And this is because it's highly unlikely that we would need to upgrade a substation. And so my approach to estimating the cost is first to look at the number of charging ports there will be per site, and then looking at the power level at each site. And then that power level would correspond to a probability of an upgrade of each infrastructure segment. And then when it triggers an upgrade, I'll look at the cost to high and low cost. And that's to represent variability in site condition. So here is a summary of my results, and it's presented per port costs. So, and then by charger types. So here you can see we expect a total of 24 to 38,000 ports. And then the number of sites, about 14 to 20,000. And these are the ports per site, and then the cost per port for a single family residential L1, 0 to 300, for a single family residential L2, 3,000 to 10,000. A multifamily L2 is 12,000 to 50,000. And for non-residential L2, 5 to 20,000. For DC fast, 60 to 230,000. And one thing I want to highlight here is the cost difference when you look at multifamily L2 and non-residential L2. Despite them both being level 2, the difference comes from the fact that there is less port per site in multifamily, and I'll discuss this in my key takeaway, but this affects, factors into the cost per port. So my key takeaway is that if we want to meet 80% penetration goal, the number of EVs will increase by 10-fold, while charging needs is expected to increase 6 to 8-fold, and this is assuming that utilization rate will be higher than what it is right now. Electrical consumption will increase from 1.5% of total load to 15% of total load, while on the residential side from 6% to 69%. And then the EV per household is projected to increase from 0.18 to 1.7 EVs per household. And then lastly, so from my finding, we can see that the cost per port is highly variable, and it's dependent on many things, from panel upgrade to potential need for trenching to the number of ports installed per site. And due to economies of scale, you can see that greater ports per site is more cost effective. For a non-residential L2, the cost per port at these campuses is projected to be lower than multifamily. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any commissioners who want to raise their hands for questions or comments or discussion? Vice Chair Siegel.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Mo. I appreciated it. I have one question. I keep coming back to this when I'm looking at the total number of ports. If we have 15,000 single family homes, when I look at the combination of L1 and L2 ports, it looks like the analysis, except that if you assume the very lowest number on each of these, it's really more ports than there are homes. So is the thought that there should be more than one port in single family homes?
So that, yeah, so the low end is the matches with the current number of single family homes, but on the high end, it's could assume that some homes do already have an L1 charger, and if Shiva wants to take.
So if I may add to that, we estimate for single family homes about 2 EVs. So 2.5 vehicles per home is a current for single family. So at 80% penetration, we're anticipating 2 EVs per home. So with 2 EVs, some of them may want to have a 1L1 and 1L2. That's the assumption.
Okay, so you are assuming more than one port per single family residence, even if one's L1 and L2.
Right, with the assumption that they'll have 2 EVs on average.
Okay, okay. Thanks. That just, yeah, okay. That was it.
All right, I see Council Member Cormack's hand is up. Are there any other commissioners who have questions or commentary? Commissioner Smith.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Mo, for the presentation. It was fantastic. I just ran some quick numbers. We focused on cost to the individual family, if you will, on the last presentation, and this certainly plays into this. But by my quick math, and if I look at your slide 11, the summary of per port cost per charger type, I'm coming up with a range of 112 million to 736 million in total. So $750 million at the upper end. Is my math correct? Is that roughly how y'all looked at this?
Yes, that is the range of total cost.
Okay, and is it fair to say that the 736 million, would that be the very conservative end that would say literally everyone adopts your assumptions and that we really do have like 1.7 ports per household? Is that correct? Is there an assumption, or can we add an assumption that says a family will place perhaps a level 2 charger, right? So they can at least fast charge, but they'll charge 2 cars on that same? Is that an assumption that was placed into this, or is it something that you looked at, or is that how you arrived at your 1.7?
So for the cost range that you mentioned,
yeah,
there's a couple of uncertainties with that, and for example, like the estimate of how many ports we would even need, because this doesn't just consider the single family. This is for the multifamily and also the commercial side too. And
yep.
So there's the variability in that.
So when I look, for example, for non-residential at 25 ports per site, what we're assuming is that across Palo Alto, the average number for multifamily units or housing apartments, apartment buildings, et cetera, condominium, the average number of ports we're going to need is 25 per that location. Is that how I read this correctly?
Yes. So in that, for the condominiums and apartments, that would be 6.7 ports per site. The non-res, yeah. So, but yes, you read it correctly.
Okay. So between single family residential L1 and L2, can you just restate the assumptions on who would do level 1 and who would do level 2, or is there a sharing in that, or are they actually separate?
Yeah, so the assumption is that for the total, like Commissioner Siegel mentioned, it would add up to around the number of
25,000 homes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so some
Or no,
combination of that will be
15
25,000 homes.
15,000 for the.
Oh, 15,000 homes. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
All right, Commissioner Danaher?
Sure. Thank you, Mo, for that. Very, very helpful data. Let's start with single family homes. We talk about ports. In fact, a lot of them are just going to need a plug, either a 110 or a 220 if they want level 2. The Teslas don't require a separate charging station, and most companies, a lot of them don't, or you just get your charge point connector from your car to the plug. So the real cost for most of them is going to be making sure they've got a 220 outlet in their garage, and that may require some wiring. So it's primarily a little bit of electrical time, and it's permitting. And get this back to comments that Councilmember Cormack made at the beginning of the meeting, that our permitting costs are higher than other neighboring towns, and we get complaints from grass people about that. I think we should look into how do we drive down the cost of somebody upgrading their electrical panel in their house, whether it's for EV or for electrification or the like. And it would be, what are the metrics? What are the metrics in neighboring towns? What's the path to get it as cheap and as efficient as possible? And the last meeting I talked about wanting to have the head of the department that's in charge of the permitting. I think it's Public Works, right, Dean? Have them present at a UAC meeting. I don't see that on the list for topics for future meetings, but I really want it. This is the third time I brought that up. Secondly, when we go to commercial or to multifamily, there's more installation you got to do, more trenching, and you're more efficient because maybe you're in a commercial, you might be doing it for 8 or 10, parking spaces at a time. But again, I think we need to see what someone should be preparing. What's the cost breakdown for those? How much of the cost is caused by the city? How can that be made more efficient so that we're not impeding people from upgrading their electric capacity at these places? And these cost estimates, I think they're at the high end in most cases, and they ought to be able to drive those down quite a bit with proper effort. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Danaher. Are there any other commissioners who would like to weigh in? I'm switching my view so I can see everybody at once. Well, let's see. I'll say a couple words and then hand over to Councilmember Cormack. Echoing others, thank you very much for the report. It's really wonderful and important to have a first stab at pulling together numbers of what it would actually take. So I really appreciate having this. Like Commissioner Smith, I tried to multiply it all out and get to the final ticket price for all in on all of this happening. And it is kind of eye-boggling how big of a number it is. But I probably should be worried about single family residential upgrades, but I'm not. I think what really caught my attention was the make-ready costs for multifamily and for non-residential. And especially for multifamily properties, because it feels like we have a definite problem of split incentives, where I'm really not sure what's in it for the property owner to do all this expensive upgrading. But it does feel like there's an opportunity in the event that Palo Alto should decide to build a bunch more housing, that there's an opportunity for, because I'm fairly certain it's much cheaper if you're not retrofitting, but if you're building something new, feel like there's an opportunity to have any new multifamily housing have a lot of EV capacity, like perhaps enough EV capacity for every unit, and not just a fraction. And on the commercial side, or the non-residential side, I have some optimism around just Silicon Valley trends, and that it's more than ever an expected employee perk that employees are demanding of their employers to be able to charge at work. My only nitpicky little question, which I will indulge myself, is how did you arrive at the estimate for the number of DC fast chargers that would be required?
So the numbers were taken in part from primarily Cal ETC's white paper. They have they did a study for California and the different scenarios of how much DC fast, and those numbers come from the number of expected types of EVs they project there'll be, so a longer range, like 300-mile, and so it's from the white paper and then adjusted.
Can you help us if there's any intuition behind the numbers of like sort of what drives it? Sort of, so you mentioned like longer range vehicles that people would be, help me out, stopping by Palo Alto on their way from Santa Rosa to Los Angeles, or?
Yeah, so their estimates were on the higher end and we actually lowered it, but it's a combination of increased range, but also ride sharing vehicles, as well as the size of the DC fast, if it's a hub or if it's a small station.
So from the behavior angle, it would be Uber and Lyft drivers with electric vehicles needing to quickly charge.
Yeah.
Is one example. Got it.
Yeah.
I may add to that. So that's part of it. But as Mo was saying, we kind of reduced the number from the Cali TC, and it's about 8 to 10 times the current Tesla chargers in town. So currently there are about 30 fast chargers in Palo Alto.
Are you taking into account the difference between Tesla superchargers and standard component superchargers? That you need some of each somehow for non-Tesla owners to also be able to fast charge?
Correct. We don't distinguish between the two.
Got it.
In this, no, but yeah.
That would be a stage future thing to include. All right, thank you. Councilmember Cormack?
Thank you, Chair Forcell. And I'm sorry, Mo, how do you say your last name?
Sadwatana.
Thank you, Ms. Sadwatana. It's, again, a very important building block as we get ready to make some big decisions in the community. It's important for us to understand where we're headed before we blithely implement all of these great ideas. So the one question I had is, I just want to make sure I understand the difference between level 1 and level 2 on slide 7 with the existing estimate. Seems a little off based anecdotally. We only have about 300 charging ports that are level 2 in single family residences now. Seems low somehow. And that 10 times as many are the, what I'm going to call the trickle chargers. I'm sure there's a fancier name.
So those were internal estimates, so we don't have exact numbers, but I got them from the L2 permits and looking at assuming that unique addresses, and this is a very loose assumption that unique addresses are residential or multifamily, and then repeated addresses are commercial. So assuming that these commercial properties have a lot more L2s, and then also that these permits converting to ports. So typically we would only have one L2 port at a home, and then, but also for commercial, I multiplied that by 2 because the permit number chargers were chargers and not ports. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, yeah. So it sounds like you looked at the permits. So I mean, someone has added up how many permits we've issued, and we haven't issued more than 350. Just seems low, that's all.
No, I think the permits were close to 600 to 800.
Okay.
But we assume the residential, so some of them were commercial. So the residential permits, yes, that's correct. 300 is a residential.
Okay, well, we must have a high adoption, at least on my block then. Thank you so much.
I want to point out that for residential EV chargers, we had a study done a couple of summers ago by another fellow, and the conclusion was the majority of EV drivers are not pulling permits to install a level 2 charger at home.
Okay. Pretty sure I did. But that might explain the discrepancy. Thank you, Ms. Kelty.
Out of curiosity, does it present any risk to the system, unpermitted L2 chargers?
Well, it does. I mean, that's the reason we have permits from an electrical utility perspective. Yes, anytime there's a addition more than 40 amps, we require an application, a load sheet submitted to us. But level 2s, as long as the electrician has made sure that the panel has sufficient capacity, but there is no inspection to make sure that the installation is done correctly.
Got it.
And if I can just add, so as Elizabeth was talking earlier in her presentation about our transformers, some of them getting up to capacity, these are some of the reasons why. You know, when folks add more capacity into their home or onto their panel portions and they don't pull permits, we'll never know what those additions might be on that block. And it could overload a transformer or get very close.
Is the load on a transformer something that's measured at the location of the transformer, or is it something that's estimated based on, you know, what's been permitted on that line?
It's pretty much estimated by what goes on from when the block was put together. As Shiva just mentioned, you know, if there's a new load sheet because a customer is going to upgrade their whole home, then we'll know that we can take a look at that transformer. But those transformers have been there for some time when all the homes were brand new, or it might have been replaced, but it was replaced similar like, because we haven't seen that much upgrade, you know, increase in need for a bigger transformer.
Yep.
And to add to that, we estimate it based on the monthly energy consumption, and there's a algorithm, a formula which is applied, and then there's an estimate, and we know how many homes are connected to a transformer. And so that's how it's typically done. But the EVs have been now factored into that equation, which we have in the process of trying to do.
Interesting, thank you. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Sodwatana, if I got that correctly. Moving on then, do we have any commissioner comments or reports from meetings and events?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
All right. So I'll just talk a little bit about NCPA. Couple things. One of the things we're doing is we're relooking at the state of emergency powers we granted the general manager and seeing if it's time to sort of ratchet those back a little bit. And I think we've decided that we're going to ratchet them back to just be employee related rather than having more authority on the amount of money he can spend without coming to the commission first. And I think that's a good thing. So we're looking at the governance issues there and making sure that we're looking at it properly. The other thing we're doing at NCPA is I think we're finally tackling the unfunded pension liability. And I've been pushing to use the Palo Alto model where we set aside I can't remember, I think it's like a section 119 trust where you put extra money in, and then you look at a much better discount rate than what PERS uses. So I think we're going to copy Palo Alto's model and move forward on doing that to try and solve that issue, because I've been raising the issues over a long period of time now about how that looks for the long term for all the member agencies, and to make sure that we don't have, you know, liabilities that we haven't really dealt with, and so we don't have a problem down the road. The other thing I wanted to mention I thought was interesting, which came across, is that APPA, which is the American Public Power Association, lost their lawsuit on the small cell tower issue. I don't know if Council dealt with that for a while there, where the FCC passed a resolution that said we couldn't charge certain fees, and we had to basically do expedited cell phone towers for people, and the community would basically have a lot less input. And I know Anna Eshoo tried to put through a bill with, and NCPA was very supportive of that. And there's been a lot of that, and APPA filed suit, and they lost that suit at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And they just recently lost their request for an en banc hearing. So now I think they're considering going towards the United States Supreme Court, but I think they're going to have a tough road there. So I wanted to put that out there. And then let's see, a couple other things. Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, Greg. Can you explain what that means though? If they lost, what does that mean? Where are we?
That means that the FCC rule is going to stand unless the new president changes it.
And can you remind us what the FCC rule was?
So
I
the
just
FCC,
lost track.
So the FCC rule is that on the cell tower installations, when Verizon wants to put in new installations, Palo Alto has a bunch of rules, and a lot of other cities do, regarding aesthetics and other things. And the FCC had a rule that basically said you had a really short period of time to review these applications, and you had very few grounds to deny them. And they made it much less on local control on that issue. And most cities were pretty upset with the way it rolled out. And so, and Anna Eshoo put forward a bill to change that. Of course, that went nowhere at the Republican Congress. And so we filed lawsuits. Basically, the APPA filed lawsuits, and Palo Alto is a member of the APPA. So that was basically the process. And I just thought I'd tell you that went nowhere. I don't know who was following it, but I know, I'm sure Allison has been following it. So that, and then the other thing that was interesting was we had Elliot Miser, who's the CAISO president and CFO, and that's the balancing agency for California. We had a meet and greet with him because he's the new via Zoom, and that was actually fairly interesting. He didn't really say much of substance, but he basically indicated that he recognizes that hydro is a really important asset to climate change, and we talked a lot about how we have huge hydropower assets. NCPA does and Palo Alto does, and he basically indicated that they should be supportive of hydro, obviously looking at the environmental issues, and it's a bit of a balancing act, but hydro is clearly an important component of all of this. So I thought that was interesting. And then he acknowledged the huge issue we have with transmission costs, that transmission costs are growing up at a much higher rate than virtually anything else, and that they really need to be brought under control. And so he said he wasn't sure what he was going to do about it, but he recognized it as an issue. So that was really the couple things I got out of that meeting. So I just thought I'd pass that along.
All very interesting. Thank you. Are there any other commissioners? Comments, reports, events? All right. Let's see. We've got on the upcoming December agenda a lot going on, and then less stuff slotted in for the months ahead. Are there any commissioners with input on topics for future meetings? And I will say also, that talking to Director Batchelor and Assistant Director Abenshine last week, we realized that in this section of our agenda where we talk about topics for upcoming meetings, it would be super helpful when we commissioners have ideas of things that we're interested in, to frame the request in terms of if you think it's a topic, a discussion topic for a meeting, or maybe it's just a request for an informational report, or maybe it's just a request for some information kind of following up over some other format. Director Batchelor could include it in his director's report. Just some what are your thoughts of kind of the level of yeah, where you would think it would belong in a future UAC meeting is helpful for us to be able to take into account. Well, us staff mainly. So with that, Commissioner Danaher.
Yes. First, Dean and Jonathan, thanks for great meeting tonight. They're really interesting presentations, especially from your very talented interns. Yeah, we talked earlier in the year about measures being taken to promote installation of EV charging. Of course, the coronavirus has put a lot on hold, but I'd just like to have an informational report, very simple format that shows what we've done. And I'm not expecting we've made progress because of the pandemic, but at least to get the report in there one of these next couple of meetings and get the format down so that every 6 months or something we could get an update on that, see how we're doing. And that's informational, doesn't necessarily, I mean, it might lead to a little bit of discussion or questions, but it's not an action item or something to vote on. And then back to the other discussion, we've talked about contractors feeling frustrated about how difficult it is to do solar or install storage in our Palo Alto homes. And I was actually pleased to hear a lot of people are upgrading their panels without getting a lot of headaches from the permitting process. Maybe it's because they just ignore it, but at least, understand how we're approaching that and invite the appropriate person from Public Works to talk about this. And I know there are at least 2 council members, I'm going to include Council Member Cormack on that, who are interested in seeing how efficient we can be in these processes. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Danaher, can I just ask one clarification? I'm sorry, you talk about this info report is about updates on the installation of EV chargers?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
because we had a report this spring on how it was going to roll out and how you're helping businesses, and if you've made any progress on that this year, I'd be impressed. But at least we got to get the format of the report and make sure we're tracking it.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johnston?
Yeah, 2 things. First, I want to thank Director Batchelor and the staff for the 2 information reports that they included with our packet. This on the rec exchanges and the AMI progress. I mean, I think it's very helpful to have that kind of information. So thank you for that. Second, I know that one of the things that's on our rolling calendar and has been on the rolling calendar is something to be scheduled for a long time is the discussion of the second transmission line. It just strikes me that as we talk about electrification and basically turning off the gas and being totally dependent on electricity, people are going to be that much more concerned about what happens if there's an outage. And I think that unless we have a good answer for how we're going to avoid outages, we're going to have an even harder time to get people to give up gas where they can at least cook and heat things if the electricity is out. So I'd like to see us actually schedule that as opposed to simply having it on the menu of things that we'll talk about in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
I would just like to echo Commissioner Johnson's comments with respect to the information memo. You know, it's not, it's rare that we get to actually celebrate something, and I consider this a win. So thank you to Dean Batchelor and the staff. $2.9 million as per target raised through the bucket recs. That's a huge plus for the City of Palo Alto Utilities Department and the City of Palo Alto in general. I just think that needs to be celebrated. So congratulations to the team.
Thank you. I'll pass it on.
I agree. Those informational reports were very helpful. Are there any other suggestions? If not, I have one, and it's definitely not a request for an official report and agendized discussion item. I am curious. The unfortunate accident that happened, I forget exactly when, probably coming up on a year ago now, and there was going to be an OSHA investigation, and I'm just kind of curious what happened, what were the results of the investigation, and if CPAU needed to make any changes as a result.
So we have been making some changes. The investigation is still going on at this period of time. We did receive, and it's noted to the public from Cal OSHA, there were 6 items that were identified, but the investigation is still going on. And we have looked at some of our procedures. We've changed some of our procedures. One of the items that they talked about it was we had a 2018 safety manual. They felt that that was outdated. We thought that it was somewhat in date, a couple years old, or 1 year old. But they felt that it needs to be done on a yearly basis. And so we revamped our safety manual. Every employee has a new safety manual. HR's reviewed it. Our legal department has reviewed it. It will be something that we will give to Cal OSHA when they ask for that portion of it and what we're doing. And like I said, we've looked on one of their concerns was on the way that we actually do our hiring practices. I think that what we found was most places, I'd say almost pretty much every place, once they receive a line person that holds a card, the feeling is that individual, he or she, should be able to do the job. You bring them on, they start working, and so on and so on. So what we've looked at is that we're going through a whole new process on how we're onboarding our new employees in that line section. Not even that, but just onboarding all of our personnel and utilities as a whole. So we're changing the process of that. We worked with some outside firms on looking at some different type of testing, some more hands-on, some evaluations of those individuals from a third-party firm to give us an idea if this person is really going to be a good fit for us, or what their really base knowledge is. So those were some of the items that OSHA had identified that, and so we are taking steps for that. But again, like I said, investigation is still going on.
Good to know. Thanks for the on-the-spot update. And I don't know, maybe when the Cal OSHA report is done, if that's a publicly available document, you can just point us at it or include an item in the quarterly update or something like that.
Yeah, I thought that maybe once that portion of it is completely done, we'll just make it an info report and put it in the packet. Because like I said, it will be accessible for public viewing.
That'd be great. Thank you. Let's see, Vice Chair Siegel.
Thanks. That discussion did make me think of one item that this would be just like something to add in your director's report or one line, but just sort of how staffing challenges have been impacted by COVID, because I think, my understanding is there's still a lot of construction work being done. Are we having challenges there? I know we put freezes on some positions, but not others. And so I'm always interested to hear how that's coming along.
I can make sure that I can give an update in my report next month about that and where we are.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. All right. I think we are on the home stretch here. Just another scan for hands up. All right. Thank you, everybody.
I move
Very
to
interesting
adjourn.
meeting, very productive meeting. We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
All right. How about just show of hands? We're all good. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Bye.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.